Chapter 2354. Hunzong. However, in a single instance, the peak experts all found Jian Chen. Does he plan on leaving the desolate plain through a teleportation formation? The teleportation formations across the plain have been sealed up a long time ago. He's dreaming if he wants to flee through them. As they spoke, all the peak experts vanished from the Radiant Saint Hall. They pursued Jian Chen. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall hovered before the sacred hall as the light in his eyes flickered. He hesitated. Clearly, he was rather tempted by the Anata Tower on Jian Chen, along with the thought of obtaining it and handing it up to the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bisheng. It was his only opportunity to develop ties with the Heavenly Palace of Bisheng. However, as soon as he thought of Xianzhan, he could not help but hesitate. Just don't get involved. There are a lot of people who want the Anata Tower. Even if you go, it's unlikely for you to obtain the Anata Tower. At this moment, Xianzhan appeared. He stared at the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall deeply and said, "Moreover, things have happened with the Tower of Radiance. The mist inside is rapidly decreasing. The Tower of Radiance is enough for us. It is extremely likely for your son to be inside the Anata Tower. Aren't you afraid that they'll harm your son after they obtain the Anata Tower?" asked the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. The Anata Tower is a peak god artifact after all. Even if it's heavily damaged, it's still impervious. Unless they refine the Anata Tower, they can't enter it. Xianzhan was not worried at all. He said with composure, "And as for refining the Anata Tower, I don't think they're bold enough." "Oh no. Leader, something terrible has happened." At this moment, a panic-stricken voice rang out. An elder of the Radiant Saint Hall hurried over with several Radiant God Kings behind him. However, the Radiant God Kings seemed to be in a rather horrible shape. "Leader, I've just received news that the Grand Exalt's legacy within the Tower of Radiance appeared. The supreme cultivation method within the legacy imprint was obtained by Chang Yang, and he's a member of the martial soul lineage," said the elder in a hurry. "What? The Grand Exalt's legacy appeared? The cultivation method actually fell into Jian Chen's hands?" The expression of leader of the Radiant Saint Hall changed drastically. Even Xianzhan's eyes narrowed as he became extremely shocked. The Tower of Radiance had a Grand Exalt's legacy. This had always been an ancient rumor that had yet to be proven in the Radiant Saint Hall. They had never thought it would suddenly appear now. The Grand Exalt's cultivation method is the greatest legacy of our Radiant Saint Hall. We can't let it fall into the hands of others. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall became extremely stern. In the next moment, a terrifying presence radiated from him, and a white spear suddenly appeared. It concealed its glow, but it still possessed devastating power. The spear swept past the space there and directly ripped it open. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall directly stepped into the ripped space and left. This time, Xianzhan did not stop him. Nothing would have changed if Jian Chen had not obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy, but Xianzhan could no longer find any reasons to help him now that he had taken away the supreme cultivation method. 100 million kilometers away from the Radiant Saint Hall in the central region of the desolate plain, a small building of only 3 stories tall sat within the noisy region of a bustling city. The building was one of the many buildings on the street. It was located close to the center of the city. The land prices there were astronomical. However, ever since the building was purchased by a mysterious person many years ago, it had just sat there idly. No one moved in. The building was empty. There were no decorations at all. There was only a formation disc several meters wide placed on the top floor, covered with profound inscriptions. At this moment, the formation suddenly flashed, and with a powerful pulse in space, a person in white light appeared. This person was Jian Chen. As soon as Jian Chen appeared, he leapt out the window and shot towards the center of the city like a bolt of lightning. He was extremely stern. After his soul had fused with chaotic force, his senses became unimaginably powerful. He could vaguely sense that the senses of several dozen souls had locked onto him. The owners of every single one of these senses was not someone he could stand up to. There was even an extremely obscure senses of the soul that Jian Chen could barely discover. It sent chills down his spine. He really is Jian Chen. He truly hid deep. Now, I can finally return to Master with what Master wants. At the same time, an old voice rang out from an estate within a distant city. Afterwards, the wooden door of a building within the depths of the estate opened up, and an old man in coarse clothes walked out. Senior 2. Immediately, a middle-aged man appeared silently. He immediately showed respect when he saw the old man. Let's go. Let's get Jian Chen and return to the heaven-splitting clan, the old man said indifferently, as if he did not take the peak experts on the desolate plain seriously at all. With that, he vanished completely. The middle-aged man vanished as well, leaving the place as if he had teleported. Adriana, it's time for us to go as well, a benevolent old woman said to the woman in green beside her while she held a staff. At this moment, Jian Chen had already arrived at the very center of the city. This was the hub of the city, and the teleportation formations that could take people across plains happened to be located there as well. Jian Chen, the teleportation formation have already been sealed up. You can't leave. Hand over the Inata Tower, and I won't make things difficult for you. Jian Chen, give the Inata Tower to me. Our Dao Huang Empire will protect you. Give me the Inata Tower, and I'll let you live. Otherwise, die. At this moment, the space above Jian Chen twisted. Peak experts appeared one after another. They were scattered throughout the surroundings, remaining vigilant of one another as they surrounded Jian Chen. The sky above the city ripped open and endless light fell, illuminating the region. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had arrived as well. He looked at Jian Chen with mixed feelings and sighed gently. I don't care whether you're Chang Yang or Jian Chen. But regardless, leave behind the cultivation method. That's the greatest legacy of our Radiant Saint Hall. We can't let others take it away, and we can't let people of the martial soul lineage take it away even more. The greatest legacy of the Radiant Saint Hall? Did that thing in the Tower of Radiance end up with Jian Chen instead of a disciple of your Radiant Saint Hall? At this moment, a mocking voice rang out. A middle-aged man with an appearance that was nothing special had silently arrived. He seemed just like an ordinary person. However, the appearance of the middle-aged man immediately caused the expression of the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall to change. He growled, Hun Zong, you've actually come as well. The middle-aged man referred to as Hun Zong chuckled and said, the eighth brother of our martial soul lineage has appeared. How can I not come for something so significant? I obtained the Inata Tower in a lower world, and then I brought it up to the Saints' world. I will never just hand it over. Even if it'll be returned to the heavenly palace of Bisheng, I'll return it personally, Jian Chen replied at this moment. He spoke very indifferently and calmly. The eyes of all the peak experts gathered there turned cold from that. Even Hun Zong was surprised. He stared at Jian Chen deeply and only said after quite a pause, Are you certain that you don't want to relinquish the Inata Tower? I will not, Jian Chen was determined. Very well. I respect your choice. Hun Zong nodded. As he said that, his eyes suddenly became pitch black. They were like two black holes that could devour all light. Extremely powerful martial soul force shot out from his eyes, piercing through space towards all the peak experts gathered there as invisible swords. Martial soul force was a wondrous and unique power formed from the combination of a fighter and Radiant Saint Master. It was extremely powerful and specifically targeted the soul. It was invisible, making it extremely difficult to sense. It would catch people off guard. The peak experts gathered there were vigilant of their surroundings at all times, remaining cautious of everyone there. However, no matter how cautious or vigilant they were, it was a waste of effort before the martial soul force. They were unable to defend against martial soul force. Even if they discovered it, they could only dodge beforehand. If they could not dodge it, they could only endure it. Martial soul force was invisible and could pierce all objects. Let alone the protective energy around them, but even god artifacts of lower qualities were unable to stop Hun Zhang's powerful martial soul force. Immediately, all the peak experts nearby were affected. Under the influence of martial soul force, they became temporarily stunned. They were all very powerful. Their souls were like balls of roaring flames. With Han Zhang's martial soul force scattered, it was very difficult for him to harm any one of them. However, stunning them for a split second was more than enough. Since you don't want to give up on the Inata Tower, we'll take the Inata Tower back to the Martial Soul Mountain with us. Jian Chen, you're very right. You obtained the Inata Tower in the lower world. Since it fell into your possession, it's your fortune. Why must you give it to someone else? Han Zhang laughed aloud. He had already arrived beside Jian Chen, wanting to leave with him while everyone was stunned. When Han Zhang took action, a tremendous, imposing mountain that was seemingly capable of flattening the world appeared silently. It hovered in outer space strangely. The mountain was not physical. Instead, it was an illusionary shadow. It seemed like a projection. 6 figures sat on the illusionary mountain. They were all expressionless and emotionless, like monks meditating. They gave off presences of varying strength. Qing Shan happened to be among them. The illusionary mountain happened to be the martial soul mountain renowned throughout the saints' world. However, it was only a projection of the martial soul mountain. Jian Chen, for you, the entire martial soul lineage has come. Come with me to the Martial Soul Mountain. As long as we arrive on the Martial Soul Mountain, these people won't be able to do anything to you, Han Zhang chuckled. He was fearless, as if he was not worried about offending so many peak experts at all. However, just when Han Zhang wanted to take Jian Chen away, space suddenly ripped open. And a skinny hand reached out. With the truths of the world, it pressed towards Han Zhang along a trajectory that obeyed the laws. Han Zhang immediately became extremely stern. At that critical moment, his entire presence suddenly changed, as if it had established some sort of connection with the illusionary mountain in outer space. He also extended his hand, making it collide loudly with the skinny hand that reached out from the spatial crack. The collision was not as intense as one would have imagined. It all seemed calm. The two of them had purposefully withdrew their powers, or the storm of energy from their clash this time would have been enough to demolish the entire city. Han Zhang suddenly quivered and retreated uncontrollably. At this moment, the illusionary mountain beyond the desolate plain quivered gently as well. The projection seemed to become even dimmer. Our heaven-splitting clan will be taking Jian Chen. No one else is allowed to take him away. As an old voice rang out, the spatial crack suddenly expanded, and an old man walked out. Chapter 2356. People from the God clan. The peak experts affected by Han Zhang's martial soul force had all recovered now. They did not bother about settling their debts with Han Zhang. Instead, all of them stared at the old man who had suddenly appeared with ugly expressions. Even if they ignored the old man's strength, the heaven-splitting clan he represented was enough to stifle everyone present. This was all because of their heaven-splitting ancestor. The heaven-splitting ancestor was one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalt. The first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bisheng stood at the same level. They were both figures revered by people in the saints' world. These peak experts had taken such drastic measures to search for the Inata Tower because they wanted to hand it over to the heavenly palace of Bisheng. If they did that, they could establish ties with the heavenly palace of Bisheng through the merit of their service. But at this moment, someone from the heaven-splitting clan had suddenly appeared. They wanted to take Jian Chen away, which was a horrible matter for all the peak experts gathered here. They could never afford to offend the heaven-splitting clan. Even Han Zhang's heart sank when he heard the heaven-splitting clan. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall also felt that this was a horrible matter. Jian Chen possessed the Grand Exalt's cultivation method. He could not allow the cultivation method to end up in the hands of the martial soul lineage, but he felt powerless now that the heaven-splitting clan had thrown their hat into the ring. Does your heaven-splitting clan want the Inata Tower as well? Asked a peak expert regretfully with a frown. They had gone to extremely great lengths to find Jian Chen. They had searched through the entire desolate plain time and time again. Now that they finally found him, someone from the heaven-splitting clan suddenly appeared, wanting to take Jian Chen away. Would that not mean all their efforts during those years would be for nothing, and they were taken advantage of in the end? This made all of them resentful. The old man snorted coldly. He said in complete disdain, "It's only a damaged god artifact. Why would it catch the eye of our heaven-splitting clan? I've only come under Master's orders to take Jianchen away. You can fight over that tower as much as you like." Everyone became relieved from that. At the same time, they felt shocked. All of them looked at Jianchen with mixed feelings. Naturally, they knew who the master the old man was referring to. Aside from the legendary heaven-splitting ancestor, who else had the right to make such a powerful expert refer to them as master? Jianchen was only a god king, yet he could raise the attention of the heaven-splitting ancestor, and even make him personally give orders to send an expert over to protect him. It did not matter what intentions the heaven-splitting ancestor had for protecting Jianchen. What was certain was that once this news made it out, all the people who wanted to lay their hands on Jianchen would need to carefully consider the consequences. "Jianchen, give the Inata Tower to them, and then come back to the heaven-splitting clan with me. If you can get the support of my master, there will be no need for you to go to such great lengths to establish ties with the heavenly palace of Bisheng," the old man from the heaven-splitting clan said to Jianchen. Jianchen remained expressionless. He asked sternly, "Junior is very confused. Junior has nothing to do with the heaven-splitting clan, and Junior doesn't know the heaven-splitting ancestor either. May I ask just why the heaven-splitting ancestor wants me?" "You will naturally find out once you arrive at the heaven-splitting clan," replied the old man from the heaven-splitting clan. "Humph, unless the heaven-splitting ancestor comes personally, don't you even think about taking Jianchen away." At this moment, Hunzan called out. Suddenly, he began to shine with blinding light, and he seemed to become one with the martial soul mountain in outer space. Their powers completely fused together. It was not just that, the 6 figures seated on the martial soul mountain also shone like Hunzang. Their vital energies and all their powers seemed to combine together in that instance before fusing with Hunzang through the illusionary martial soul mountain. As a result, not only did Hunzang fuse with the power from the martial soul mountain, but even the 6 other members of the martial soul lineage had completely fused their powers with Hunzang through a special method. Immediately, Hunzang's presence became extremely terrifying. All the peak experts gathered nearby frowned. They became afraid. The legendary martial soul array of the martial soul lineage really is worthy of its name. However, this isn't the martial soul mountain, so the amount of power you can borrow from the martial soul mountain is extremely limited. A mere projection of the martial soul mountain is not enough for you to do whatever you want, said the old man from the heaven-splitting clan coldly. He immediately used a palm strike. His hands seemed to fuse with the surroundings and the laws, crushing down on Hunzang with the supreme mysteries of the world. But at this moment, a staff appeared out of nowhere. It gently struck the old man's hand. Immediately, a devastating might erupted. It directly ripped through space and created a fist-sized black hole. It devoured everything in the surroundings, sucking away all the energy there. The old man from the heaven-splitting clan remained the same as before after the strike, but the staff that had appeared out of nowhere dimmed. An old woman appeared silently, and the staff returned to her hands. "I was already expecting the God clan to send people over, but I never thought it would actually be you. It looks like that young leader of your God clan really does place great importance on Jianchen, actually sending a hall elder." The old man from the heaven-splitting clan looked at the old woman calmly. "What? A hall elder of the God clan?" The expressions of all the experts gathered there changed after learning the old woman's identity and background. In the past, the God clan was known as the greatest clan in the Saints' world. They were the undisputed most powerful organization. However, ever since the war god passed away, they had declined and lost that title. However, even with that being the case, the God clan was still among the handful of peak organizations in the Saints' world. Their heritage was extremely deep. Very few people dared to provoke them. "Tu San, since you know Jianchen is someone that our war god holds dearly, you should also understand that you won't be able to take Jianchen away," said the hall elder, Tyne. She knew what kind of person the heaven-splitting ancestor was and knew even better that he definitely had some sort of unknown motive for taking Jianchen away. As a result, she could not allow Jianchen to be taken away by the people of the heaven-splitting clan. Tu San shook his head, and a sliver of disdain flashed through his eyes. He said, "The current god clan is no longer the god clan of the past. Before your little war god truly matures, you have no right to speak to our heaven-splitting clan like that. Moreover, unless a great elder of your god clan comes personally, you Hall elders aren't my opponent." Tyne's eyes turned cold when she heard that. She said slowly, "I never thought that a clan so insignificant that they were unworthy of our god clan's attention would try to dominate our god clan today. Tu San, since you're so confident, I would like to see whether you can defeat me, an early Grand Prime, with your strength as a mid-Grand Prime." With that, Tyne pointed her staff at Tu San. Immediately, a dense, green light enveloped him. In the next moment, the two of them vanished. "Hunzong, take Jianchen back to the Martial Soul Mountain as soon as possible. Don't let the people of the heaven-splitting clan get a hold of him. The heaven-splitting ancestor isn't someone who would be up to any good." When Tyne vanished, her voice rang out in Hun Zhang's head. Chapter 2357, A Dangerous Situation. Hun Zhang's heart immediately sank when he received the Hall Elder's message. He became even more determined to stop the heaven-splitting clan from taking Jianchen away. Hunzong has already used the Martial Soul Array. He possesses the powers of the Martial Soul Mountain and 6 other people. Coupled with the strangeness of Martial Soul Force, it'll be difficult for us to take him on alone. Quick, let's work together to keep Hunzong busy. We can't let Jianchen approach the Martial Soul Mountain before he hands over the Inata Tower. Since Jianchen is unwilling to hand over the Inata Tower, let's take it ourselves. Everyone, if you want the Inata Tower, we need to cooperate. Let's get the Inata Tower first. We can talk about how we split it some other day." At the same time, the peak experts gathered there spoke out. They understood just how deep the heritage of the Martial Soul lineage ran. Even though they could never become Grand Primes, no peak organization on the Saints' world dared to underestimate the Martial Soul lineage. This was all because of the Martial Soul Mountain's existence. They knew extremely well that once Jianchen returned to the Martial Soul Mountain, there would truly be nothing that they could do. "This is the territory of my Dao Huang Empire, so leave the Inata Tower to me. You only need to keep Hunzong busy. We can discuss who the Inata Tower belongs to after we get it." The ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire spoke out at this moment. He gave off the bearing of a ruler and was serious both in speech and manner. He seemed like he could not be defied. He directly took action. His hand shattered space, arriving before Jianchen in a single instance as if distance was an arbitrary concept. "Jianchen, I don't want to harm you. I will only take your Inata Tower. Do not make an ignorant decision," the ancestral emperor said. The Martial Soul lineage and the God clan stood behind Jianchen, so he was clearly slightly worried about Jianchen's identity. However, this worry was evidently not enough to stop him from trying to take the Inata Tower. "Don't you dare!" Hunzong called out. Using the fusion of powers, he struck out decisively, stopping the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire. At the same time, his eyes immediately turned pitch black, like a black hole that swallowed all light. Powerful martial soul force shot out like invisible swords once again, targeting the peak experts in the surroundings. "Be careful," one of the peak experts called out, but it was still useless. Even though they could sense Hun Zhang's attack, there was nothing they could do to defend against it. The invisible swords of martial soul force possessed a wondrous power that could shake up the soul. It pierced through their defenses and struck their souls. Immediately, all of them tremored, and their eyes became momentarily lost. At the same time, they paused. Even the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire was not an exception. However, Hunzong did not target these people any longer. Taking Jianchen with him was the priority. He grabbed Jianchen's shoulder and was about to leave. Boom! At this moment, a deafening boom exploded in the sky. A colossal, azure peng appeared beyond the desolate plain. Its wings were unfurled, blotting out the sun. It struck the projection of the Marshal's Soul Mountain heavily. The projection immediately shook violently. It constantly twisted and distorted in shape as it rapidly dimmed. It was the Azure Peng King. He had taken action as well to stop the people of the Marshal's soul lineage from taking Jianchen away. Due to the Celestial Sword Saint's existence, he did not dare to set foot on the desolate plain. However, the projection of the Marshal's Soul Mountain was unable to descend onto the desolate plain either. It could only appear in outer space. As a result, the Marshal's Soul Mountain became the perfect target for the Azure Peng King. With the Marshal's Soul Mountain under attack, Hunzong seemed to be heavily affected. His body trembled as his face became flushed. The power from the Marshal's Soul Mountain had almost been severed from him. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance was a peak expert who had reached mid-grand prime. Moreover, the noble, powerful blood of a divine beast flowed through his veins. Not only was his speed almost unmatched, but even his battle prowess could be described as impressive. A strike from him possessed extraordinary power. Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance, our Marshal's soul lineage has never done anything to you. What are you trying to do? Hunzong called out. Jianchen must die. Even if the God clan is protecting him, I will never leave him alive. The Azure Peng King's icy voice rang out loudly from outer space, brimming with killing intent. He was the only person who truly wanted to kill Jianchen among the peak experts. Han Zhang's face became ugly. The Azure Peng King's original form was a great peng. He had a vicious personality and was known for clinging to his grudges in the saints' world. He was not an easy person to deal with. Since he had said something like that, he really did want to kill Jianchen. However, he did indeed possess the strength and right to be fearless of the God clan. The war god of the God clan had yet to mature completely. With his terrifying speed, no one in the God clan could make him stay, that even included the three great elders. Hunzong, you won't be able to take away Jianchen as long as the Inata Tower remains with him. The peak experts affected by Hunzang's martial soul force had all recovered. They all struck out to keep Hunzong busy. Booms constantly rang out in outer space. The Azure Peng King launched consecutive attacks, where every single one of them was devastating, causing space to crack. The projection of the Marshal's Soul Mountain tottered under his attacks. It already showed signs of collapse. The Marshal's Soul Array had been forcefully cut off as well, unable to support Hunzong any longer. After all, this was only a projection of the Marshal's Soul Mountain. It only contained a portion of the Marshal's Soul Mountain's power. It was not the true Marshal's Soul Mountain. Without the support of the Marshal's Soul Array, Hunzong immediately lost the upper hand as he faced so many peak experts who were more powerful than him. The protective formation of the Daohuang Empire had already been activated. All of its power gathered outside the city, locking in the shockwaves and preventing them from spreading out. At the same time, the tremendous population of the city was all moved away by the power of the formation. The situation is bad. Chu Jian, let's go help out Hunzong. Aside from Hunzong, there's only me and you out of the six of us who can stand up to those people. The six figures on the mountain projection did their best to stabilize the Marshal's Soul Mountain. One of the middle-aged men looked at the desolate plain and said sternly, "We can't. We have to stabilize the mountain projection. We can't let it collapse from the attacks of the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance, or we won't be able to cross this huge distance and return to the Marshal's Soul Mountain through the Marshal's Soul Mountain's power," said Chu Jian sternly. On the desolate plain, the ancestral emperor took action again. He reached out towards Jianchen, locking down an entire region. Jianchen's eyes turned cold. With a thought, the damaged Inata Tower shot out from between his eyes. The power of laws that compressed the limits seemed to have condensed on the Inata Tower. It was able to crush everything. Hence, as soon as the Inata Tower appeared, the frozen space was instantly freed. Jianchen clutched the Inata Tower and activated as much of its power as he could, sending it towards the ancestral emperor. The Inata Tower. The ancestral emperor's eyes lit up. He stared at the Inata Tower with shining eyes, and his hand that originally reached towards Jianchen moved towards the Inata Tower instead. Terrifying power condensed on his hand. It seemed to be able to collapse space. He had put on the strongest defense. However, the power of the Inata Tower was just terrifying. Even though Jianchen could not unleash any of its power as a peak god artifact, its weight alone was shocking. Having been careless, the ancestral emperor was directly knocked hundreds of meters away by the force of the Inata Tower. It really is a god artifact of the very peak. The ancestral emperor's eyes shone with interest. He had only been knocked away, not injured, because even though Jianchen had refined 5 floors of the Inata Tower, he was still unable to harm a Grand Prime through the Inata Tower alone. Immediately, the ancestral emperor took action again. This time, he was prepared. He did not collide with the Inata Tower directly. Instead, he used a gentle force to wrap around the Inata Tower. Chapter 2358, Attempting the Path of Swords. Jianchen was cold. He knew that he had caught his opponent off guard the first time, so he had managed to knock him away while he was still ignorant of the Inata Tower's force. However, he definitely could not use the same method twice. It was extremely likely for the Inata Tower to be taken away. Jianchen pulled back the Inata Tower, clutching it in his hand as he rapidly retreated. The hand condensed from terrifying energy reached over with a supreme pressure. Wherever it passed by, space froze up and the laws paused. It moved towards Jianchen with great speed such that he was unable to condense his laws of the sword. All the laws he grasped were affected, and he was unable to use them like normal. The ancestral emperor's attack could affect space and interfere with the operation of the laws. This was how terrifying a Grand Prime was. Even though they were nowhere close to Grand Exalts, who had basically become a part of the laws, they had still comprehended the laws to an extremely deep level as Grand Primes. They could use a part of their powers. As a result, when the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire struck out, Jianchen felt like he was facing the world, as if what targeted him was the world he currently resided in. Even all of his laws had been restrained. However, Jianchen did not become flustered at all. With a thought, he used the power of the Inata Tower. Immediately, it destroyed Jianchen's restraints and enveloped him. Jianchen isolated himself from the world with the power of the Inata Tower, allowing him to become immune to the restraints. With a flash, he retreated to several hundred meters away, arriving in the central square of the bustling city. Currently, the central square had been reduced to a mess. All the structures had collapsed into ruins. The entire place had basically been flattened by the shockwaves from the battle. The protective formation of the Dao Huang Empire did not protect this city. Instead, it gathered a certain range away from the city, locking the place up to prevent the shockwaves from spreading out and causing even greater damage. Too many peak experts had gathered here. As a result, even the protective formation for the entire empire was unable to block all of it. If something happened to the formation, they would lose something even more important than what they were trying to protect. However, 2 places remained unaffected in the ruined square. The first place was the teleportation formation across plains. This was one of the most valuable properties of the Dao Huang Empire, and it had been rather difficult to construct. As a result, it received the most protection. The other place was a flight of stairs constructed from sword chi. This was the path of swords constructed by the greatest expert of the desolate plain, the celestial sword saint. It was also unscathed. All the shockwaves seemed to be cut in half by an invisible sword when they approached the path of swords, redirected into 2 streams. Jianchen had already arrived beside the path of swords. He glanced at the peak experts gathered in the surroundings before looking at the colossal bird that blotted out the sky. Determination appeared in his eyes, and he set foot on the path of swords boldly. Immediately, Jianchen became wrapped up by powerful sword chi. He was already standing on the first step of the path of swords. The face of the ancestral emperor changed. He immediately stopped, staring at Jianchen from 100 meters away. He was expressionless. The path of swords had been laid down by the celestial sword saint to find a successor. It was rumored that if someone made it to the end of the path of swords, they would have the opportunity to become the celestial sword saint's disciple. Once someone set foot on the path of swords, the test laid down by the celestial sword saint would formally begin. The ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire did not dare to continue his attacks. Jian Shen has actually made it onto the path of swords, oh no. Jian Shen focuses on cultivating the way of the sword, and his talent is rather extraordinary. If he passes the celestial sword saint's test and becomes his disciple, we won't have any opportunities left. The peak experts who were keeping Han Zong busy paid attention to Jian Chen's situation at all times. Now, they all cried out with ugly expressions. Some of them even blamed the ancestral emperor. Don't worry. He can't pass the celestial sword saint's test. Do you know how strict the celestial sword saint is with his selection? How can he pass the test personally set down by the celestial sword saint so easily, said a peak expert. At this moment, there was a flash, and the hall elder of the god clan, Tyne, as well as the old man from the heaven-splitting clan, Tu San, returned. They were both in a rather messy shape. No one knew the result of their battle. He is actually attempting the path of swords. Tyne stared at the hazy figure surrounded by sword chi on the path of swords and frowned. Then she muttered, though, that might be the best choice right now. However, Tu San's face was sunken. He glared at Tyne and said coldly, "Your god clan has gotten in the way of an important matter of my master. You've made my master wait even longer. Your god clan better consider the consequences of offending my master." Tyne's eyes turned cold and she replied icily, "If your heaven-splitting clan has the ability, come find our god clan on the Godnigma plain." "Humph, master is only a step away from that level of cultivation. Once my master breaks through, I would like to see how your god clan plans on continue acting arrogantly." Tu San snorted coldly, as if he disdained Tyne's words. At this moment, the battle between Han Zong and the peak experts stopped as well as Jian Chen set foot on the path of sword. He glanced at Jian Chen before looking at outer space. His gaze was extremely shocking. Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance. Suddenly, Han Zong bellowed out furiously, and he suddenly vanished. When he appeared again, he was on the Martial Soul Mountain. Martial Soul Array. Han Zong bellowed out and fell into formation with the 6 other people on the Martial Soul Mountain again. Their powers were poured together once more, completely merging with the power from the Martial Soul Mountain. Powerful martial soul force swept out like a shocking wave towards the Azure Peking. The martial soul force came from the 7 of them. It was no longer scattered. Instead, it was concentrated on a single point. It was extremely terrifying. The Azure Peking, who had been constantly attacking the Martial Soul Mountain, showed some fear. With a flash, he retreated to billions of kilometers away, avoiding the range of the Martial Soul Mountain's attack. Han Zong and the 6 others stood with sunken faces on the Martial Soul Mountain. The Azure Peking was just too fast. Their attacks with martial soul force could not land, so there was nothing that they could do about him. Jian Chen must die. None of you can protect him. If your martial soul lineage dares to help Jian Chen again, I'll kill you all as well. Unless you stay on the Martial Soul Mountain for your entire lives like cowards, you won't be able to avoid being hunted down, the Azure Peking said coldly with sharp killing intent. Afterwards, the Azure Peking looked at the desolate plain, at Jian Chen who had already stepped onto the path of swords. A cold intent appeared in his eyes, and in the next moment, he plucked one of his azure feathers and threw it. Like a bolt of lightning, the feather shot towards the desolate plain with great speed. It crossed a huge distance in a single instance, arriving above the path of swords and shooting towards Jian Chen with devastating power. Chapter 2359, The Bearing of Sword Immortal. 1. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance has actually attacked the Path of Swords. The Path of Swords was constructed by the Celestial Sword Saint. How bold of the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance. He really is the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance after all. There's really only a few people who dare to disrespect the celestial sword saint, and he just happens to be one of them. The peak experts around the path of sword all cried out. The heavenly king of azure brilliance was undeterred by the celestial sword saint and had launched an attack at Jian Chen after he set foot on the path of swords. They would never possess such courage. The heavenly king of azure brilliance's feather had arrived above the path of swords with pulsing, destructive energy by now. The strike was extremely astonishing. If the feather landed, not only would Jian Chen be done for, but even the path of swords might be destroyed. Jian Chen's face changed as he stood on the path of swords. He controlled the Anata tower with all his efforts, wanting to hide in it as soon as possible. This was a sure kill strike from the Azure Pen King. If it made contact, it would be very difficult for him to survive with his current strength. However, the azure feather was just too quick. The concept of distance was negligible before it, and it arrived in a single instance. It was so fast that Jian Chen did not even have the opportunity to enter the Anata tower. Jian Chen's heart sank. At this moment, he felt the threat of death. Blue bird brain, how bold of you! At this moment, an ancient voice rang out grandly. The terrifying sound waves could pierce through anything, causing space to shake as even the laws of the world seemed to be affected. The space around the path of swords suddenly twisted. The laws operating in that region were seemingly distorted. The Azure Pen King's feather immediately slowed down when it entered the twisted space. In the next moment, the path of swords that was completely condensed from sword chi suddenly shone with blinding light. A resplendent strand of sword chi shot out from the path of swords into the air. The sword chi was like a blinding streak of light, tearing through the air with enough brightness to make everything else pale in comparison. As soon as the heavenly king of azure brilliance's feather came in contact with the sword chi, it disintegrated. The feather that was supposed to contain devastating power seemed fragile. The sword chi continued onwards without weakening at all, tearing its way to outer space. Terrifying sword intent had already locked onto the heavenly king of azure brilliance. The heavenly king of azure brilliance's face changed slightly, and deep fear appeared in his eyes. His body that was as colossal as a planet shrunk to 10 meters wide in a single instance. He had become a tiny azure peng. However, slashes appeared on the azure peng's body. The slashes either cut through his flesh, making him bleed, or swept past his tough feathers, leaving behind white marks. This was the result of getting locked onto by the sword chi, caused by the terrifying sword intent. The celestial sword saint was just too powerful. Before the sword chi had even arrived, the sword intent had already affected the space there, turning the region around the Azure Pen King into a boundary of sword chi. All the laws and all the powers within the boundary of sword chi were under the celestial sword saint's control. It all turned into sharp swords. Celestial sword saint. The Azure Pen King bellowed out in resentment, but he did not dare to stay where he was. With a flash of azure light, he vanished in a single instance, fleeing to the depths of space with terrifying speed. However, as he left, the terrifying sword chi that had shot over from the path of swords passed through the azure light that the heavenly king of azure brilliance had turned into. Immediately, blood sprayed out. The heavenly king of azure brilliance has fled. However, he's injured, said the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire sternly as he stared at outer space. One of his wings had almost been cut off. The celestial sword saint is so strong. His cultivation level is high enough, but his battle prowess exceeds his current level of cultivation as well. The Hall Elder of the God Clan, Tyne, looked towards the path of swords in admiration. Tu San from the Heaven-Splitting clan remained silent. At that moment, he had also discovered that the celestial sword saint's strength was much greater than the rumored. At the very least, he felt that the sword chi the heavenly king of azure brilliance faced was life-threatening. He knew that if the person who faced the sword chi was someone other than the heavenly king of azure brilliance at the same level of cultivation, it would have been impossible for them to escape. Only the heavenly king of azure brilliance could escape with his almost unmatched speed. The foreign peak experts around the path of swords all became fearful. They could not help but distance themselves further from the path of swords as they felt great danger. As peak experts, they could sense just how terrifying the previous sword chi was to an even greater degree. The bottom of their hearts shivered when they saw the astonishing sword chi, and it was to the point where chills even ran down the spines of many. Jian Shen lost the ability to observe the outside world after the sword chi was launched. All of his senses had been cut off by a powerful sword intent. Now, he had entered a hazy, white world. Apart from the flight of stairs that led into the sky, there was nothing else present. White was the only color in this world. This is a world of the way of the sword. Jian Shen sensed his surroundings with his mind and immediately understood the secrets here. The world had been conjured from the way of the sword. The steps beneath him were compressed from the laws of the sword, and every single step of the stairs that led upwards represented a portion of the laws of the sword. Jian Shen sucked in a deep breath. He knew that the test from the celestial sword saint had formally begun. He began to ascend the stairs slowly. He made his way up with confident steps. Once he reached the end, he would have the opportunity of accepting the celestial sword saint as his master. He did not want to become the celestial sword saint's disciple. If he could, he would distance himself from the celestial sword saint. After all, the celestial sword saint was the greatest expert on the desolate plain, possessing unfathomable strength. If he spent long periods of time with someone like that, he was worried that the celestial sword saint would still find some problems with him despite Mo Tianyan's mask. After all, he possessed the twin swords. However, he had no other choice now. Jian Shen ascended the steps without stopping. The test of the way of the sword hidden within each step gradually became more difficult. Where he was right now was the simplest part of the tests, so there was no need for him to stop at all with his current cultivation level. This was because Jian Shen would easily pass through the tests the moment they appeared from the steps. Very soon, Jian Shen completed a third of the path, and at this moment, the tests he faced became greater and greater. He began to slow down. Chapter 2360, The Bearing of Sword Immortal, 2. At this moment, the tests from the path of swords became stricter and stricter. Consequently, Jian Shen was forced to stop for a while with his eyes closed to comprehend them. In the ruins of the city, the Hall Elder of the God clan, Tu San from the Heaven-Splitting clan, and the peak experts from various places all stood below the path of swords and watched Jian Shen climb upwards. Jian Shen was unable to see anything outside while he undertook the tests from the path of swords. All of his senses were restricted within the path of swords, but the peak experts could see him clearly. Under their watch, Jian Shen basically seemed unstoppable. He completed a third of the distance without slowing down at all, making many of the present peak experts nervous. More than 90% of them did not wish for Jian Shen to pass the test of the path of swords. If Jian Shen made it to the end and became the disciple of the celestial sword saint, they would not be able to do anything to him under the celestial sword saint's protection. It's just a pity that outsiders can't interfere with the tests laid down by the celestial sword saint. Otherwise, at that moment, many of the peak experts sighed inside. If the situation allowed it, they would use various methods to make Jian Shen fall down. However, the fate of the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance and the Celestial Sword Saints might have drained all their courage. He has clearly slowed down. Don't worry, he can't pass through the Celestial Sword Saints tests. The Celestial Sword Saints' path of swords has already stood for several 100,000 years. Countless prodigies have attempted it in hopes of becoming the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple, but in the end, none of them passed. Jian Shen will definitely become one of the numerous people who failed. Elder, do you think Jian Shen can pass through the Celestial Sword Saint's tests? Adriana looked at Jian Shen on the path of swords and asked in concern from beside Tyne. It's very difficult to say. Although Jian Shen's talent can be described as unprecedented, the Celestial Sword Saint's tests can't just be described as simply as almost impossible. Not only do they test talent and wit, but they also test a person's temperament. If the Celestial Sword Saint is unsatisfied with their temperament, they can't become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple no matter how great their talent is, said Tyne of the God clan slowly. Her old eyes stared right at Jian Chen, and she continued, as a result, not only is there a need for extremely great talent for the way of the sword, but the celestial sword saint must also find you appeasing in order for you to become his disciple. The celestial sword saint is a loner. He never takes anyone seriously, nor does he make contact with other experts of the saint's world. His temperament is very strange, so it's difficult to appease him. On the other side, Tu San, who stood before Tyne, stared at Jian Chen with squinted eyes. He sneered inside, Jian Chen, do you think you've changed something by setting foot on the path of swords? The celestial sword saint is very powerful, but no matter how powerful he is, he's nothing in my master's eyes. Tu San was very confident. After all, his master, the heaven-splitting ancestor, was one of the greatest experts below Grand Exalt. He stood at the same level as the First Majesty of the heavenly palace of Bisheng and was only a single step away from becoming a Grand Exalt. A person like that indeed had the right to look down on almost everyone in the saint's world. At this moment, Jian Chen had arrived high in the sky. He had completed half of the path of swords that plunged into the clouds. What is the sword? Suddenly, a tremendous voice rang out in the hazy white world that Jian Chen was in. It boomed like a great bell, shaking up Jian Chen's mind. The sword is a will, a spirit. Jian Chen closed his eyes and opened his mind. He explained his understanding of the way of the sword through his comprehensions of its essence, its spirit. What is the way of the sword? The booming voice rang out again. The way of the sword is a law. The way of the sword is the world. The tests became tougher and tougher on the path of swords. Gradually, it approached the very essence of the way of the sword, the core of the 3,000 ways in the world. The resistance that Jian Chen encountered became greater and greater as well, such that the amount of time it took for him to take each step multiplied. In the blink of an eye, a month had already passed since Jian Chen set foot on the path of swords. During that month, Jian Chen had completed 3/4 of the path of swords. He only had 1/4 of the distance remaining before he could reach the end. Nothing too drastic happened during this month. However, the number of peak experts gathered on the desolate plain did increase. These people had hurried over from various places across the saint's world with various intentions after learning that Jian Chen had been exposed. Naturally, some people wanted to try and benefit from the situation. After all, when Jian Chen was hidden on the desolate plain before, no one knew where he was hiding. It was extremely difficult to find him, so there were obviously many peak experts who were unwilling to take part in something so arduous. However, now that Jian Chen had been fully exposed and had been forced onto the path of swords, these people finally found their opportunity. None of them believed Jian Chen would really pass the Celestial Sword Saint's test, as they had already learned about the details of the tests from those who had attempted it in the past. They were confident that he could not complete it. All of the peak experts had already departed from around the path of swords. Of course, they did not truly leave. Instead, they hid in the distance, paying close attention to the situation there. With their cultivation levels, they would be able to capture the slightest disturbances. They could also travel a huge distance in a split second. Jian Chen managed to benefit from the month of tests on the path of swords. As he rapidly advanced through the tests, he tested and verified his comprehensions of the way of the sword with the mysteries within the tests. He found many areas he was lacking in, allowing him to deepen his comprehension of the way of the sword even more. I'm at the great perfection of sword spirit right now. My next realm is sword immortal. The great perfection of sword spirit is equivalent to a late god king's comprehension of laws, while sword immortal is equivalent to the primordial realm. Jian Chen sat there as the light from the laws of the sword enveloped him. Countless strands of sword qi revolved around him. The sword qi was sharp, but every single strand seemed to possess a hint of intelligence, as if they had a spirit. This was a sign of sword spirit. However, at this moment, the sword qi around him gained a sense of elegance, a sense of liberation, as if they had become unbound from the word. At sword spirit, the sword qi is about the word spirit. They're intelligent, as if they have a spirit of their own. Sword immortal is about the word immortal. They must possess an immortal bearing. Immortals are liberated. They're untainted, unshackled from the world and free, Jian Chen murmured. In that moment, he seemed to gain an immortal bearing. He had already understood the true essence of sword immortal. He had touched upon its boundary, but he did not cross it just yet. However, since he had seen it, since he had found the path, truly crossing over was only a matter of time now. He basically had a foot planted in the sword immortal realm now. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes. He stood up from the ground, and after gathering his concentration, he continued onwards to a higher step. However, he now possessed a sense of natural elegance, an immortal bearing. His every action seemed to abide by some kind of supreme mystery in the laws of the world. This was a transformation in presence from having a foot planted in the sword immortal realm. Jian Chen was still unable to control it completely, struggling to maintain a state where he had returned to the basics, so he always demonstrated it accidentally. As a result, he seemed very extraordinary. Afterwards, Jian Chen continued to climb the path of swords, making it further and further up. Now, he approached the top of the path of swords. He was getting closer and closer to completing the tests. However, at the same time, the resistance Jian Chen encountered became greater and greater, taking up more and more time. The final segment of the path did not test simple things like a person's talent for the way of the sword and affinity for comprehension. It also included battle experience, the ability to counterattack in dire situations, and even his temperament. Jian Chen had gone through countless battles where his life was on the line from the Tian Yuan continent to the Saints' world, so his battle experience was extremely rich. However, it was still extremely difficult for him to make it through the various tests the Celestial Sword Saint had set down. Jian Chen, it has been so many years. I've finally found you. When Jian Chen set foot on the next step, the landscape around him suddenly changed. He had arrived in a world of natural beauty. A great beauty stood before him. Her beauty seemed to gather all the color in the world, making the surroundings pale in comparison. She was Shangguan Mu'er. Mu'er, Jian Chen was surprised. He looked at the beauty in a daze as the softest, weakest heartstring seemed to be tugged firmly. Jian Chen, you've roamed the saint's world for the sake of greater strength such that we're almost always separated. You even have to bear the potential pain of becoming separated forever. Jian Chen, just give up on the pursuit of strength. Give up on the way of the sword. We can step away from the world and live a peaceful life. How good would that be? Tears flowed down Shangguan Mu'er's eyes as she looked at him hopefully. Her pitiful look could melt even the toughest hearts. It was very difficult for anyone to turn her down. Jian Chen's mind immediately shook. His will wavered. In that instance, he was almost tempted to agree to Shangguan Mu'er's request, giving up on his pursuit of strength to retire and settle down for a peaceful life with Shangguan Mu'er. Peace isn't that easy to achieve. Jian Chen shook his head. In this world, the strong have always preyed on the weak. Strength is the only thing you can rely on to survive. Without enough strength, living a life of peace is merely wishful thinking. I won't give up on the way of the sword, nor will I give up on the pursuit of strength, as that is what I rely on to survive, Jian Chen said firmly. With that, the scene before him shattered. Shangguan Mu'er vanished and so did that wonderful world. He had returned to the white, hazy path of swords. Jian Chen sucked in a deep breath. Determination flooded his eyes, and he took a step forwards boldly, climbing up to the next step. Afterwards, Jian Chen experienced illusion after illusion. Without any exception, the illusions showed the people he was the closest with. All of them either betrayed Jian Chen, or they were slain in front of him. It was mental torture through various means. These illusions all touched the softest spots in Jian Chen's hearts. It was his Achilles heel, so he endured unimaginable mental torture as he went through these tests of illusions. His mind had almost collapsed. The illusions were just too realistic. It was impossible to tell the real from the fake for those who became submerged in them, so Jian Chen was heavily affected. There were several times that he became confused. Inner demons. These are all my inner demons. Jian Chen shut his eyes and felt powerless. Inner demons were the demons of the mind. They referred to the emotions and desires of a person, the weakest embodiment of a person's mind. Jian Chen was no enlightened saint. He had his emotions and desires as well. He had his feelings. All of this would give birth to inner demons. The last tests of the Path of Swords are truly brutal. They've triggered the demons in the depths of my heart. If my mind wasn't determined enough, it would have collapsed long ago, and I would have been driven to insanity, thought Jian Chen. Cold sweat gradually appeared on his forehead. However, in the next moment, his gaze became determined. He thought, these are all tests that I must go through along the path to becoming strong. Since I want to reach a higher level of cultivation, I can't be defeated by my inner demons. My family and friends are indeed my soft side. But that's all because I'm not powerful enough to protect them. However, when I become a grand exalt one day and stand as the sovereign at the very apex of the world, will there still be anyone who dares to threaten me with my friends and family? Once these restraints are gone, the demons in my heart will collapse on their own. Very soon, Jian Chen became determined, and he continued to climb upwards. When he reached the next step, the landscape around him changed again. He was brought to a battlefield in outer space. It was a war between the saints' world and the immortals' world. Outer space was packed with people. Jian Chen happened to be standing with Tai Ta, Ming Dong, Shangguan Mu'er, Changyang Mingyue, and everyone else he was familiar with, leading the experts of the Tian Yuan clan to war against the immortals' world. He had already become a peak expert of the saints' world now. It's the people from the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. Jian Chen, let's kill them together, Tai Ta's voice rang out from beside Jian Chen. The Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. Jian Chen became dazed and lost. He had obtained the twin swords, so logically speaking, he belonged to the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. He belonged to the immortals' world, yet at this moment, he was assisting the saints' world in dealing with them. Retreat. Jian Chen waved his hand. He did not come into conflict with the people of the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. Jian Chen, what are you doing? Tai Ta bellowed furiously. Jian Chen was a figure of deterrence on the battlefield. Once he retreated, danger would immediately befall the God clan. They would be completely surrounded by the experts of the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. Kill the war god of the God clan. Several experts struck out at the same time from the side of the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens in an attempt to kill Tai Ta. Within the illusion, Tai Ta was not as powerful as Jian Chen had imagined him to be. As a result, he immediately became heavily injured and endangered when he was surrounded by several experts from the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. Moreover, even Ming Dong, Shangguan Mu'er, Changyang Mingyue, and so on faced danger. Jian Chen finally took action at that critical moment, repelling all the experts of the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. Jian Chen, hurry up and kill the experts of the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens. Kill the people of the immortals' world. Once they die, the immortals' world will suffer great losses, and they'll no longer be our saints' world's opponent. Ming Dong and everyone else's voices rang out nearby. However, Jian Chen hesitated. He faced a painful dilemma. They have already been heavily injured. They're basically incapacitated. They can't even escape. Disciples of the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens, fall into formation and kill all enemies. Elders, use the secret technique with me to suppress Jian Chen, an old man from the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens called out at this moment. Immediately, he and the other experts sacrificed their vitality in exchange for strength greater than they previously possessed, unleashing a supreme sword formation at Jian Chen. A painful struggle flashed through Jian Chen's eyes as he looked at the experts who killed their way over. He looked back at his heavily injured friends and family. He still ended up taking action. He stopped the sword formation and managed to stop all the experts from the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens and the Immortals world alone. However, he did not harm any of them. Seeing how they were unable to do anything to Jian Chen, the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens all made up their minds. They used an ancient, forbidden technique, burning their own life force to kill Jian Chen and the experts of the Saints' world under Jian Chen's protection, even if it would cost them their lives. Jian Chen, why do you constantly hold back? They're from the Immortals' world. They are our enemies. Hurry up and kill them all, someone close to Jian Chen urged him loudly. Brother, kill them quickly. Take revenge for your sister. Your sister almost died to their hands, said the silver-haired Changyang Mingyue. She had been heavily injured by the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens. She was basically at death's doorstep. Jian Chen hovered in outer space as his body shook violently. He endured the painful torment in his heart. On one side stood his close friends and family, while the other side was the sword sect of Violet Heavens that he was bound to by countless strands of fate. Now that they had turned on each other, what should he have done? What choices should he have made? In particular, when he saw that the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens who were about to offer up their lives, he felt pain. Although I stand in the Saints' world, I still belong to the Immortals' world in the end. I'm a disciple of the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Do the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens have to die for me? Jian Chen seemed saddened as his emotions wavered drastically. He had no idea what to do as he faced a situation like this. Let's go. In the end, Jian Chen still could not bear to watch the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens die for him. Before they had wasted away their lives, he waved his hand and moved away with his people. He chose to flee. Jian Chen, why won't you kill the people of the Immortals' world? Why won't you kill the people of the sword sect of Violet Heavens? Jian Chen, we need an explanation. You're always showing mercy towards the opponent. Do you belong to the Immortals' world? Afterwards, Jian Chen faced the doubts of everyone. Many people even became suspicious of his identity, and many people he was close with could not help but back away. Jian Chen fell silent as he faced the doubtful and cautious gazes in the surroundings. Suddenly, Jian Chen felt alone. He had become isolated. At this moment, the landscape around him suddenly shattered. Everyone vanished, and he was brought to another foreign battlefield in outer space. On the battlefield, he was still a peak expert. However, he currently worked with a sovereign of the Immortals' world against an expert of the Saints' world bathed in golden light. Four swords hovered above the head of the sovereign from the Immortals' world. He controlled the four swords, cutting through space like he was invincible. The sovereign of the Immortals' world was blurry. Jian Chen was unable to see him. However, Jian Chen recognized the four swords under his control with a single glance. They were the sword of mortality, the sword of reincarnation, the sword of slaughter, and the sword of severance. On the other side, the expert bathed in golden light was the war god of the god clan, Tai Ta. He was currently working with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, engaged in a battle to the death against Tai Ta in the depths of outer space. Tai Ta was extremely powerful. He needed to work with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt to fend him off. In the end, he and the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt paid quite a hefty price to knock back Tai Ta, heavily injured him. The Nirvanic Immortal Exalt immediately sent the four swords over, creating a sword formation to kill Tai Ta in one fell swoop. However, at this moment, Jian Chen's mind shuddered. He thought of all the times he had spent with Tai Ta in the past. Suddenly, he struck out, not towards Tai Ta, but the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's four swords. He wanted to stop them from killing Tai Ta. What are you doing? Barked the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. I won't let Tai Ta die here, said Jian Chen. He's from the Saints' world. He must die, the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt called out and continued to try to kill Tai Ta. Jian Chen did not back off. He stopped the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt from killing Tai Ta. In the end, a battle erupted between him and the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. At this moment, golden light silently appeared. The heavily injured Tai Ta had taken advantage of the battle to swing his axe towards Jian Chen. Jian Chen stared straight at the axe that traveled towards him as disbelief filled his eyes. In the end, The axe landed on him with devastating power under his gaze. Immediately, he experienced piercing pain from the bottom of his heart. The pain made Jian Chen's mind shake, and in the next moment, he felt the world spin around him. Tai Ta vanished, and so did the nirvanic immortal exalt. Even the outer space around him collapsed. His consciousness had returned to his body. He had returned to the white, hazy world of the Path of Swords. There were no longer steps condensed from sword chi before him. Unknowingly, he had reached the end of the Path of Swords. However, Jian Chen was unable to lighten up at all. Instead, he sat down where he was and sank into his thoughts. His heart was heavy. It varied from person to person. He knew that everything he experienced in the illusion was the worries hidden in the depths of his heart. It had been drawn out by a mysterious power when he took the mental test. At the same time, it had sent his subconsciousness into an illusionary world created by his own mind, presenting his greatest worries in the most realistic manner. In simpler words, everything that happened in the illusion were burdensome thoughts Jian Chen had once experienced. Perhaps these thoughts had only flashed through his head before being forgotten very soon, but they had been endlessly magnified in the illusion, forming an illusion that was almost real and could affect his mind. The appearance of these illusions did indeed have a great effect on Jian Chen. It forced him to reevaluate his identity as well as his position. He really was very worried that everything he saw in the illusion would happen to him one day. During all these years, you're the third person to complete the Path of Swords. At this moment, an old voice rang out. In the next moment, the landscape around Jian Chen changed. He had already left the Path of Swords, appearing on a mountain that reached into the clouds. Before him sat an old man in white clothes with his back facing him. Junior Jian Chen greets Senior Sword Saint. Jian Chen immediately bowed with a clasped fist. The Celestial Sword Saint sat there as still as a mediating monk. After a moment of thought, he said slowly, "The two people who completed the Path of Swords before were not suited to be my disciple. You are no exception either. You are unsuitable." The Celestial Sword Saint's reply stunned Jian Chen. The fact that he could not become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple did not surprise him. What did surprise him was that there were two other people who had completed the Path of Swords. Jian Chen had experienced just how difficult the many tests on the Path of Swords were firsthand. The mental test in the end had affected him drastically. He did not even know if he had passed it successfully. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how exceptional the two other people were. Their talent was no worse than Jian Chen's. "Senior Sword Saint, may I ask just how much talent is needed to capture Senior's interest?" Jian Chen asked. "It's not a matter of talent. You and the two other people who completed the Path of Swords all possess extremely great talent. Barely anyone can match you across the entire Saints world. The reason why you and they were unsuitable was because you all failed the final mental test. You are unsuitable for inheriting my legacy," the Celestial Sword Saint said slowly. His old voice was filled with energy. Jian Chen's heart suddenly sank. He asked, "Senior Sword Saint, do you know everything about the illusions we went through at the end?" "That's not an illusion, but a mental test. It's also known as a test of inner demons. Those with firm wills will keep their hearts as firm as rock when they undergo the test. They won't be affected at all, nor will they show any weaknesses. However, your emotions were far too intense when you underwent the test. As a result, you're not the one I want," said the Celestial Sword Saint. "I see," Jian Chen was secretly relieved. At the very least, he was certain that the Celestial Sword Saint had not failed him because of everything he experienced in the illusion. Instead, it was because of his emotions. Since Junior is unsuited to become Senior Sword Saint's disciple, Junior naturally will not keep insisting. However, can this Junior stay here for 3 years? I will leave by myself after those 3 years. Of course, I do have something for Senior. To express my gratitude, this Junior will give Senior Sword Saint this." With that, Jian Chen took out a wooden box. "With my cultivation, there's barely anything that can catch my attention in the world. What can you, a mere god king, take out? Of course, unless it's a treasure from the birth of the universe like Fortune Jade, the celestial sword saint was put into a tough spot by Jian Chen's gift. Although this junior does not know what kind of treasure the Fortune Jade mentioned by senior sword saint is, this junior does have quite an extraordinary item. As he said that, Jian Chen had already opened the wooden box. Immediately, a heavenly resource appeared. The heavenly resource was of an extremely low grade. It would not even interest regular god kings, let alone the celestial sword saint who possessed an exceptional cultivation. Suddenly, the celestial sword saint became surprised. In the next moment, the heavenly resource disappeared from Jian Chen's hand and appeared before the celestial sword saint. It's actually Xianhuang Qi. It looks like you found a Xianhuang microcosm, the celestial sword saint said calmly, without any particular emotion at all. It was like even a Xianhuang microcosm was unable to interest him. The Xianhuang microcosm was a place hidden in a lower world. Moreover, it has never been excavated and is of an extremely high grade. This junior is willing to offer up information about the Xianhuang microcosm, said Jian Chen. He had only explored the outskirts of the Xianhuang microcosm when he was in the sea realm in the past. In reality, another world existed within the Xianhuang microcosm. If the region outside that world belonged to mortals, then the region within the world was for immortals. Back then, due to his limited strength, Jian Chen had only moved around the outside of that world. He had never set foot in the domain. If the heavenly resources outside the domain were items for mortals, then the items within the domain were for immortals. They were truly treasures of high quality. Xianhuang microcosms are indeed extremely rare. A Xianhuang microcosm with a boundary is enough to drive many grand primes insane. Unfortunately, it's still completely useless to me, the celestial sword saint said calmly. His ancient eyes remained unwavered, and he returned the heavenly resource with Xianhuang Qi back to Jian Chen. He was completely uninterested. Jian Chen was surprised. Was the celestial sword saint really someone who had ascended from mortality, unaffected by materialistic objects, where even a Xianhuang microcosm with a domain was unable to interest him? Jian Chen was troubled now. The peak experts were all waiting for him outside. Once he left the celestial sword saint's territory, it would be impossible for him to evade capture. The celestial sword saint's territory was the only safe place for him right now. Although he also knew about the cavern hidden in the depths of the desolate plain, so many peak experts were eyeing him closely right now. If he really did go there, it was basically asking for trouble. But for the sake of the Empyrean Demon Lord, I can let you stay here for 3 years, but it will only be 3 years. After those 3 years, leave by yourself, the celestial sword saint said at this moment. The Empyrean Demon Lord? Jian Chen revealed his doubts when he heard that. He did not know Mo Tianyun was the Empyrean Demon Lord right now. After all, when he helped Mo Tianyun destroy the formation so that his original body could break through, he had suffered the backlash from the chaotic force. He was close to death, having lost all sense of the outside world. He did not hear the bellows of the Saint of Grand Harmony. The Empyrean Demon Lord is the person who gave you that mask. He's also the great elder of the Empyrean Demon cult, said the celestial sword saint. Afterwards, with a wave of his hand, Jian Chen immediately felt the landscape around him change. He had been sent to a gloomy cave by a force so powerful that he could not resist. The great elder of the Empyrean Demon cult is actually Senior Mo Tianyun. However, Jian Chen paid no attention to the changes around him. He stood within the gloomy cave as he felt like his head was in a mess. He had heard far too many rumors about the legendary great elder of the Empyrean Demon cult, but he had never thought that the great elder was actually a legendary figure of the Tian Yuan continent in the past, Mo Tianyun. The experts gathered once again in the ruined city, around the path of swords that reached towards the sky. They stared at the end with ugly faces. Jian Chen has actually vanished from the path of swords. Has he passed the celestial sword saint's tests and become his disciple? Impossible. That's definitely impossible. let's go to where the celestial sword saint cultivates and get to the bottom of this. The peak experts gathered there, all left with sunken faces. They had banded together, heading to the celestial sword saint's territory simultaneously. The celestial sword saint cultivated at the Sword God Mountains. The peak experts from various places banded together and arrived outside the Sword God Mountains. There was not a single protective formation to be seen in the mountain range, making it seem like anyone could set foot in there. However, none of the peak experts there dared to enter the boundary of the Sword God Mountains without permission. They all remained outside the Sword God Mountains. They looked at the depths of the Sword God Mountains as they showed deep fearfulness and dread, along with some temptation to retreat. However, when they saw that so many other peak experts stood with them, they eased up slightly. These people did not come here to ask for the person they wanted from the celestial sword saint. They just felt rather regretful and had come to see whether Jian Chen had really become the celestial sword saint's disciple. It shouldn't be that easy for Jian Chen to become the celestial sword saint's disciple, said the hall elder of the god clan, Tyne. She happened to be among the group as well. Adriana stood beside Tyne. Adriana stared straight at the Sword God Mountains as she remained silent. Completing the path of swords is only an opportunity to become the celestial sword saint's disciple. It guarantees nothing. Jian Chen is a member of the martial soul lineage, so it's unlikely for the celestial sword saint to accept him as his disciple, said the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire firmly. Jian Chen is someone that my master has specifically requested for. It's best if the celestial sword saint hasn't accepted him as his disciple, said Tu San from the Heaven-Splitting clan coldly. The celestial sword saint was very powerful, but he had the support of the Heaven-Splitting ancestor, so he was extremely confident in facing the celestial sword saint. Afterwards, Tu San clasped his fist towards the Sword God Mountains and said sternly, I am Tu San, and I come from the Heaven-Splitting clan. Greetings to Senior Celestial Sword Saint. Tu San's voice was thunderous, booming and echoing through the entire Sword God Mountains. The peak experts there all held their breaths, looking at the depths of the Sword God Mountains as they waited for a reply from the Celestial Sword Saint. I already know why you've all come. I've allowed Jian Chen to stay on the Sword God Mountains for 3 years. After those 3 years, he will leave by himself. He will no longer have any connections with me. The celestial sword saint's voice rang out from the depths of the Sword God Mountains. He did not pay any special attention to Tu San. Instead, he announced this information to all the experts gathered there. Tu San's expression immediately became rather ugly when he saw how the celestial sword saint had ignored him. After all, he had mentioned the Heaven-Splitting clan. His visit this time was not a personal affair, it was under the name of the Heaven-Splitting clan. It was fine if the celestial sword saint ignored him, but he even ignored the Heaven-Splitting clan. Tu San found this to be rather humiliating. The other peak experts all became relieved. They began to discuss with each other secretly. It looks like Jian Chen hasn't become the celestial sword saint's disciple. The celestial sword saint is letting him stay for 3 years, probably as a reward for completing the path of swords. That's what I was saying. Who do you think the celestial sword saint is? How would it be that easy for Jian Chen to become his disciple? 3 years. If that's the case, I'll just wait another 3 years. Elder, what should we do next? Should we discuss with Senior Celestial Sword Saint so that he will let us take Jian Chen away after the 3 years, directly taking him back to the Godnigma plane through the teleportation formations in the Sword God Mountains? Adriana also asked secretly. Tyne shook her head. With the Celestial Sword Saint's temperament, it's unlikely for him to agree. We can only wait here for 3 years and come up with another idea once Jian Chen emerges from the Sword God Mountains. The problem is that there's the Heaven-Splitting clan, and who knows why the Heaven-Splitting clan wants Jian Chen so much. It'll be troublesome. Tyne's brows furrowed as she seemed slightly worried. She said, before our war god completely matures, we can't declare war on the Heaven-Splitting clan. Although the Heaven-Splitting ancestor can't do anything to us on the Godnigma plane, we can't always stay there. We need to go to other places. We won't be the heaven-splitting clan's opponent elsewhere. That's because our god clan still doesn't have an expert who can fend off the heaven-splitting ancestor. And what is the heavenly palace of Bishing thinking? They should have received news of the Inata Tower a long time ago, but why have they still not sent someone to retrieve it? If the heavenly palace of Bishing sends someone, all of Jian Chen's problems will be resolved, including the threat from the heaven-splitting clan, Tyne sighed inside. She had no idea what the heavenly palace of Bishing was planning. Adriana's heart sank. She had already realized that it would probably become a difficult matter again in 3 years' time. At the same time, all 7 members of the Martial Soul lineage gathered on the illusionary Martial Soul Mountain under Hun Zhang's lead in outer space. 3 years. We still have 3 years. Chu Jian, Yu Chao, you two return to the Martial Soul Mountain first so that you can prepare. I'll stay for now and find a chance to meet Jian Chen. After 3 years, we have to do everything we can to take Jian Chen back to the Martial Soul Mountain. When we're on the Martial Soul Mountain, probably no one can threaten us unless the heaven-splitting ancestor personally takes action, Han Zong said to the 6 other members sternly. Then you have to be careful of Yu Chen, just in case he's scheming something, Chu Jian warned sternly. Don't worry. Although Yu Chen overwhelms me in terms of cultivation, he'll definitely be the one who dies in a battle to the death. Han Zong was confident. Tu San's face became rather sunken outside the Sword God Mountains. Celestial Sword Saint, Jian Chen is someone my master wants. My master has already grown very impatient from all the years Jian Chen spent hiding. Do you plan on making my master wait another 3 years? Tu San directly brought up the heaven-splitting ancestor. He believed that only the heaven-splitting ancestor could strike awe in the heart of the Celestial Sword Saint now. After all, the heaven-splitting ancestor was a peak expert on the same level as the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bisheng. He was only a step away from Grand Exalt. Tu Sen refused to believe that the Celestial Sword Saint could stand up to him. I don't want to repeat what I just said. No matter who it is, you won't be able to take away anything from me in the next 3 years, the Celestial Sword Saint replied powerfully. He seemed to be utterly fearless. The expressions of the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains all changed when they heard that. They stared at the depths of the Sword God Mountains in surprise. The Celestial Sword Saint actually did not even respect the heaven-splitting Sword Saint. Although the Celestial Sword Saint was known for having things his way and never negotiating, he had gone a little too far this time. Tu San's face darkened from anger. He roared out, Celestial Sword Saint, you better think about the consequences of what you just said. The response he received was a flash. The surroundings suddenly darkened, and an extremely resplendent streak of light shot out from the depths of the Sword God Mountains. The streak of light moved with unbelievable speed, making distance seem like a completely negligible concept. It arrived in a single instance, sweeping through San Tuesday. It was fast, far too fast. Even the peak experts there could not react to it. San Tu's head had already been separated from his body. It was thrown high into the air as blood sprayed out, dyeing the sky red. The sudden occurrence shocked all the peak experts around Tu San. They all pulled away from Tu San as they experienced emotional turmoil. In that moment, many people felt their heads blank out. They could not believe what had just happened before them. The Celestial Sword Saint had beheaded Tu San with a single stroke. It had to be mentioned that Tu San had the support of the heaven-splitting ancestor, someone who was only second to Grand Exalts. Celestial Sword Saint, Tu San's head called out in fright in the air. He knew that if the Celestial Sword Saint wanted to kill him, he would have died long ago. It would have been impossible for his soul to survive. Afterwards, his head rapidly joined up with his body, becoming one again. These are the consequences you speak of, the Celestial Sword Saint's response rang out in an awe-inspiring manner. He was completely fearless. Tu San heard a naked provocation from the Celestial Sword Saint's words, making him both surprised and furious. He pointed at the Sword God Mountains as his lips trembled, but he did not dare to utter a single word. At this moment, the endless sea of clouds above the Sword God Mountains suddenly began to churn violently. At the same time, an indescribably tremendous pressure enveloped the entire desolate plain. An extremely terrifying will had crossed through outer space, descending upon the desolate plain. The arrival of the will made the entire desolate plain tremble slightly. Everything fell silent and began to shake in fear. It's the heaven-splitting ancestor. The heaven-splitting ancestor's will has descended. The peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains were all stern. They pulled away from the Sword God Mountains as they looked at the sky fearfully. "Master, you finally came," Tu San was overjoyed. The personal arrival of the heaven-splitting ancestor made his confidence swell. He became fearless, and his vexation caused by the celestial sword saint evaporated in the blink of an eye. "Master, I was almost slain by the celestial sword saint's sword. This celestial sword saint doesn't even plan on showing you any respect." Tu San fanned the flames, pleading for his master to teach the celestial sword saint a firm lesson. "Celestial sword saint, you've gone a little far," a tremendous voice boomed out through the surroundings. The mist and clouds churned before condensing into a figure that stood tens of thousand meters high. The facial features of the figure were very clear. He seemed lifelike. He was a man who seemed to be in his 30s. Even though his appearance was nothing special, he possessed a supreme bearing. He seemed undaunting, causing even the entire desolate plain to shake below everyone's feet. This person's arrival seemed to replace the world there, becoming the only god present. The laws of the world began to revolve around him. They were under his control. The celestial sword saint remained seated on the Sword God Mountains. His ancient figure was like a mountain, completely immovable. He stared beyond the Sword God Mountains calmly, looking at the heaven-splitting ancestor condensed from the mist and clouds. He was completely calm, showing no particular emotion at all. At the same time, Jian Chen emerged from a gloomy cave elsewhere in the Sword God Mountains. He became extremely stern as he stared at the huge figure outside. Even though he did not recognize this person, he could already guess their identity. "Why does the heaven-splitting ancestor want to take me away?" Jian Chen felt very curious. After all, he had no ties with the heaven-splitting clan. Why had a supreme figure like the heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly started paying attention to him? Although a supreme god king had passed away in the Neptunian divine palace, he refused to believe that the heaven-splitting ancestor would step forward personally for this supreme god king. After all, the heaven-splitting clan was not the solitary sword lineage. Mo Cheng was the only successor of the solitary sword lineage apart from the solitary sword ancestor, so his death naturally alarmed the solitary sword ancestor. On the other hand, the heaven-splitting clan was huge. The heaven-splitting ancestor probably did not even know the name of the supreme god king who died in the Neptunian divine palace. Moreover, the supreme god king had died to Ming Dong's hands. Jian Chen was not the one who killed him. There were even fewer reasons for the heaven-splitting ancestor to pay attention to him. Jian Chen's thoughts wandered, but he could not understand why. At this moment, the heaven-splitting ancestor took action. He directly sent a palm strike towards the Sword God Mountains with his huge figure condensed from mist and clouds. With that, space collapsed and the ground trembled. The orderly laws all became chaotic as devastating power pressed towards the celestial sword saint on the Sword God Mountains. The power was just too terrifying. It had surpassed the limits that space could endure. Even the tiniest slivers of power that leaked out was enough to make space collapse. The expressions of the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains all changed in shock when they sensed the power of the palm strike. "You want to deal with me just with your will? Heaven-splitting ancestor, you underestimate me far too much." The celestial sword saint was immovable on the Sword God Mountains. He remained seated on the ground and did not stand up, but a powerful sword intent gathered on him. Afterwards, he extended a finger, and immediately, it shone with blinding light. All the laws of the sword in the surroundings seemed to gather at the finger, shooting out as a strand of sword chi that shone like a galaxy. The sword chi tore through the air, leaving behind a trailing streak of darkness. It pierced through the surroundings. The sword chi collided with the heaven-splitting ancestor's misty hand. The expected boom did not come. The sword chi directly punched through the hand, tearing through it in an unstoppable manner before directly flying towards the huge figure of the heaven-splitting ancestor. The will from the heaven-splitting ancestor was unable to deal with the celestial sword saint's sword chi. Wherever the sword chi passed by, the heaven-splitting ancestor's figure rapidly collapsed. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-splitting ancestor's arm vanished, and the celestial sword saint's sword chi directly punched through his huge body. Immediately, the heaven-splitting ancestor's body shook and began to blur. He had almost collapsed. The three lives sword intent. It really is the three lives sword intent, the mighty voice of the heaven-splitting ancestor boomed out as his eyes shone brightly. He stared at the celestial sword saint in interest. What? The three lives sword intent, all the peak experts outside the Sword God Mountains cried out in response to the heaven-splitting ancestor's words. No wonder. No wonder the celestial sword saint doesn't even fear the heaven-splitting ancestor. Turns out he obtained the three lives sword god's legacy. Tyne sighed in amazement in the crowd. The three lives sword god was a sovereign of the world from the last aeon. He was a grand exalt who specialized in the way of the sword. Over 1,000,000 years ago, the place where the three lives sword god passed away was discovered. When all the experts of the saints' world arrived there, it was already empty. The legacy was gone, and no one knew who obtained it. It looks like the celestial sword saint is the one who received the three lives sword god's legacy. A peak expert sighed in amazement with mixed feelings. The celestial sword saint actually has a grand exalt's legacy, and a grand exalt who specializes in the way of the sword. No wonder he's so powerful. I just wonder if he has grasped the authority of the grand exalt. The authority of the grand exalt is truly an invincible technique that instills despair in opponents. It would be impolite of me to not return the favor. My Sword God Mountains is not a place that anyone can trample, the celestial sword saint said coldly from the Sword God Mountains. A sword hovered above his head, shining with blinding light that illuminated the entire sky. In the next moment, the sword seemed to fuse with the celestial sword saint. With his power and will, it shot off and vanished from the desolate plain. On the Nine Clouds plain on the other side of the universe, the white-robed heaven-splitting ancestor sat leisurely within a pavilion inside the heaven-splitting clan that stood supreme on the Nine Clouds plain. He raised his head slightly and looked at the sky above him. At this moment, the sky above the heaven-splitting clan ripped open. A sword churning with a terrifying glow directly shot towards the heaven-splitting clan. It was fast, far too fast. The sword seemed to have crossed over from a completely different world. The moment it appeared, it shone with dazzling light, shooting towards the ground with unbelievable speed. Immediately, sword intent permeated the surroundings. It was terrifying and boundless, enveloping the entire Nine Clouds plain. The ancient existences who cultivated in seclusion across the Nine Clouds plain were all alarmed. They looked towards the sword chi and became shocked. What terrifying sword chi! It's the celestial sword saint of the desolate plain, it's the celestial sword saint. The celestial sword saint has actually attacked the heaven-splitting clan. He's insane, the heaven-splitting ancestor is a peak expert only second to grand exalts. Has the celestial sword saint reached a point where he doesn't even fear the heaven-splitting ancestor? The sword crossed through such a distance and directly attacked the Nine Clouds plain from the desolate plain. The celestial sword saint is even more terrifying than I imagined him to be. Various peak experts sighed in amazement in places across the Nine Clouds plain. They hovered in the air, staring at the heaven-splitting clan from afar. A protective formation rose up from the heaven-splitting clan, enveloping the entire place. The heaven-splitting ancestor had suddenly vanished from the pavilion as well. When he reappeared, he was outside the formations, standing in the path that the sword would pass through. The heaven-splitting ancestor's bearing was otherworldly. Even though he did not give off any presence at all as he hovered in the air, he seemed like he controlled the world and could determine everything in the world. It was as if he stood above the world, surpassing everything. It was like he had become a part of the ways of the world, enough to change how they functioned. Of course, that was only a feeling, a bearing that appeared when one's comprehension of the laws of the world reached an extremely profound level. He was only a step away from becoming a part of the heavenly ways. The flow of time on the entire Nine Clouds plane seemed to become abnormally slow. After the heaven-splitting ancestor's appearance in the air, the flow of time on the Nine Clouds plane seemed to be affected. The laws of the world seemed to undergo some kind of change, making the celestial sword saint's sword seemingly slow down. The laws where the heaven-splitting ancestor stood seemed to change with his existence. With a thought, he could affect the order of the world. With a thought, he could construct new laws. With a word, he could turn an entire region into his own territory. He was extremely powerful. This was the power of someone only second to grand exalts. The heaven-splitting ancestor, someone only second to grand exalts, had actually been injured by the celestial sword saint's attack. Even though it was nothing major, just a scratch, it was shocking enough. Celestial sword saint, since you've obtained the 3 lives sword god's legacy, I'll give it to you. I'll wait the 3 years, said the heaven-splitting ancestor slowly and calmly as he stared at where the sword had vanished. He was emotionless. As he said that, the huge figure condensed from the sea of clouds from when his will descended spoke the same words on the distant desolate plain. Not only did the yielding of the heaven-splitting ancestor surprise all the peak experts on the Nine Clouds plain, but even the peak experts who were about to watch how the heaven-splitting ancestor would overwhelm the celestial sword saint on the Sword God Mountains became utterly astounded. The celestial sword saint had almost collapsed the heaven-splitting ancestor's body of clouds. Not only was this a provocation, but it was also a humiliating matter to the heaven-splitting ancestor who was one of the most powerful beings below grand exalts. However, he actually did not pursue the matter. This surprised all of them. It looks like the celestial sword saint has already become so powerful that he needs to be taken seriously by the heaven-splitting ancestor. The celestial sword saint has obtained a grand exalt's legacy. Although he might not be able to become a grand exalt himself, he'll be able to reach the heaven-splitting ancestor's level at the very least. The heaven-splitting ancestor clearly doesn't want to offend the celestial sword saint over a small matter like this, indeed. Offending an expert like that over a small matter is indeed not a clever decision. Very soon, the peak experts of the 2 planes seemed to understand the hidden meaning behind the heaven-splitting ancestor's actions. Even the heaven-splitting ancestor had yielded, so the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains no longer stuck around. All of them dispersed. Most of them did not leave the desolate plain. Instead, they waited patiently across the desolate plain, waiting for Jian Kem to emerge from the Sword God Mountains in 3 years' time. However, Tu San of the Heaven-Splitting clan chose to leave, returning to the Heaven-Splitting clan on the Nine Clouds plain through a teleportation formation. The heaven-splitting ancestor remained seated in the pavilion. His eyes were closed as he gave off the presence of laws. He seemed to have fused with the surroundings, affecting the operation of the laws there at all times. Before him stood Tu San, who had just returned from the desolate plain. He reported everything that happened during his trip to the heaven-splitting ancestor. He told the complete truth, without any exaggeration at all. He did not dare to tell a single lie before the heaven-splitting ancestor. With the heaven-splitting ancestor's level of cultivation, he could see through the mysteries of the world and peer into the past and future with a single thought. Once Tu San told even half a lie or made a slight exaggeration, the heaven-splitting ancestor would be able to know instantly. The heaven-splitting ancestor opened his eyes after listening to Tu San's report. His gaze was as deep as the cosmos as he said indifferently, "It's not your fault that you weren't able to bring back Jian Chen successfully. In the beginning, I only thought Jian Chen was an insignificant person. I never thought that he would actually be very extraordinary. He's a mere god king, yet I can't peer into anything that has to do with him. That rarely happens. I've developed some interest in him as well. Master, this one will definitely bring back Jian Chen in 3 years' time, Tu San said politely. All right, nodded the heaven-splitting ancestor. After a slight pause, he said, originally, I didn't take the celestial sword saint seriously, but since he has obtained the 3 lives sword god's legacy, the situation has changed completely. Although it'll be very difficult for him to become a grand exalt in the future, he'll still be able to reach my current level through the legacy alone. There's no need to gain a lurking enemy just because of 3 years. Master is wise, Tu San had already understood this. The heaven-splitting ancestor said after the slightest moment of hesitation, most importantly, his battle prowess has already far surpassed his current level of cultivation. Defeating him is nothing difficult, but I have no confidence in killing him. He knows the secret techniques of grand exalts. If he concentrates on running, it'll be very difficult for me to capture him. Moreover, he already has the ability to harm me now. What? Tu San was in shock. He cried out, Master, that's impossible. If he didn't have the 3 lives sword god's legacy, he obviously wouldn't be able to harm me. You can't underestimate a grand exalt's legacy. The heaven-splitting ancestor looked at the distant outer space as his gaze deepened. There was a slash that had almost cut through his entire right hand. Even though the wound had closed, a mark still remained. You are dismissed. Go to the desolate plain again in 3 years' time. You have to bring me Jian Chen this time. I want to see exactly why he's special and why I can't peer into anything about him. Tu San bowed politely before backing away slowly. Soon after Tu San's departure, an ancient voice rang out. Heaven-splitting ancestor, the little master wants me to ask you when Jian Chen will be brought here. It was the voice of the artifact spirit of the Neptunian divine palace. Tell your little master not to worry. Jian Chen is very safe right now. She'll be able to see him in 3 years' time, the heaven-splitting ancestor said indifferently. Jian Chen looked at the celestial sword saint who sat on the ground with his back towards him in the Sword God Mountains. He bowed deeply and said, Thank you for assisting me, Senior. Jian Chen understood that the celestial sword saint had actually clashed with the heaven-splitting ancestor because of him earlier. This shocked him. Even though he knew that this was all because of the celestial sword saint's natural pride, the matter had still arisen from him. You don't need to thank me. Since I have agreed that you can stay on the Sword God Mountains for 3 years, you will definitely be spending those 3 years here. No more, no less. In 3 years' time, leave by yourself. Your life will be in your own hands then, the celestial sword saint said calmly. However, his voice did seem to possess a sense of power that could not be defied. It was as if his words were the edict of heaven, where no one could change his will or decisions. Be careful about the heaven-splitting clan. The heaven-splitting ancestor has become interested in you. No matter what you hear in the future, never go to the heaven-splitting clan. The heaven-splitting is hell, not heaven for you, the celestial sword saint said mysteriously, as if he knew almost everything in the world. Jian Chen's heart sank slightly. Junior understands. You can go. You don't need to worry about anyone launching a sneak attack on you in my Sword God Mountains. You can cultivate it at ease. If there are any areas in cultivation that you don't understand, you can come here whenever you like, the celestial sword saint said slowly. He closed his eyes, and he gave off a profound presence, resonating with the world and seemingly fusing with the entire mountain range. Jian Chen began to cultivate, focusing on comprehending the laws of creation, fire, and corrosion. The law he picked first was the laws of fire. The laws of fire was an extremely powerful law for attack. Once he comprehended the laws of fire to God King, it would increase his battle prowess slightly at the very least. As Jian Chen comprehended the laws of fire, the celestial sword saint who sat on a mountain peak suddenly opened his eyes. He glanced at Jian Chen's location. His expression did not change at all. He calmly said, he has already gained the bearing of a sword immortal. If he continues to comprehend it, it's extremely likely for him to reach Sword Immortal within the 3 years. However, he hasn't chosen the way of the sword but the laws of fire instead. It looks like he really plans on doing it. A gleam of light flashed through the celestial sword saint's eyes. His eyes became extremely deep in that instance, and he murmured, "That's the secret setup of Blood Tear. If he really does do that, he'll draw out Blood Tear. However, his true crisis doesn't come from Blood Tear. Whatever, I'll just let him toil about." In the blink of an eye, Jian Chen had already been cultivating in the Sword God Mountains for over a month. He roused after that time, and he frowned slightly. He was in a bad mood. Without the Fortune Jade, his comprehension of laws became extremely slow. Even though it would still seem unbelievably fast in the eyes of others, it was impossible for him to comprehend the laws of creation, fire, and corrosion to God King in just 3 years. The Fortune Jade is just too precious. As a result, I can't use it, even if I'm inside the Inata Tower. After all, the Celestial Sword Saint is just too powerful. He's far greater than most Grand Primes. I'm still not completely certain that the Inata Tower can stop the senses of the Celestial Sword Saint's soul. After all, the Inata Tower is damaged right now. It no longer possesses the defenses it had when it was in perfect condition, worried Jian Chen. Fortunately, Kaya has grasped the laws of creation and fire already. I'll comprehend the laws of corrosion first. I hope Kaya's laws of creation and fire will be useful when I need them. Very soon, Jian Chen made up his mind. Just when he was about to continue cultivating, he suddenly sensed something and looked outside the cave. It was also at this moment that 2 figures walked in from outside together. Jian Chen's eyes narrowed, and he was taken by surprise when he saw the 2 figures. They happened to be the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall and Han Zong of the Martial Soul lineage. "I've already been waiting outside for a month." "You've finally roused," the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall said as soon as he entered the cave. He stared at Jian Chen with mixed feelings. He cut right to the chase and said, "Jian Chen, I hope you can return that to me. As long as you return that, I won't look into the other matters." Jian Chen understood that the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had come for the method of the Exalted Saint. However, he had obtained the method of the Exalted Saint after great effort and difficulty, and it was something that he needed. He had obtained it completely thanks to his own abilities, so how could he just return it? "You won't look into the other matters?" "Humph, Yu Chen, you better listen up. I would like to ask you if you're bold enough to look into them," Han Zong said mockingly as soon as the leader of the Radiant Saint Master had finished talking. He did not even look at Yu Cheng and his ugly expression. Instead, he looked at Jian Chen encouragingly. He smiled, "Jian Chen, don't worry. This is the Sword God Mountains. The Celestial Sword Saint permitted us to meet you, which was quite a joyous surprise. If he dares to touch you here, he'll definitely end up biting off more than he can chew, so you don't need to be afraid of him." The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall snorted coldly inside, and he looked at Han Zong icily. However, it was just as Han Zong had said. He was indeed not bold enough to make a move in the Sword God Mountains, or it would have been impossible for him to stand so close to his arch-nemesis Han Zong. "Jian Chen, I understand you a little. I know you're a person who places emphasis on ties of friendships. You might not know it, but your teacher, the Lord of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Xian, and Biyao, who you've cared for so much, along with Donglin Yanxue, will all be pulled into this because of you. Strict punishments await them. Donglin Yanxue's punishment will be especially severe. She clearly knew that you were a member of the Martial Soul lineage, yet not only did she not report you, but she even assisted you in escaping, making our Radiant Saint Hall lose our greatest treasure. Her sins are so great that dismissing her as chosen saint is nowhere enough. Even execution will be regarded as a light punishment," said the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall coldly. He never wanted to do this, but the Grand Exalt's cultivation method was just too important to the Radiant Saint Hall. He would do everything within his ability to take it back. "Leader, are you threatening me?" Jian Chen's face gradually darkened. He said coldly, let's ignore the fact that I obtained the cultivation method through my abilities alone for now. Your Radiant Saint Hall should be grateful and not resentful towards me for the appearance of the cultivation method in the first place, as I am the reason why the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance awakened. It was also because of me that the hidden miniature world opened up, and it is all because of me that the Grand Exalt's legacy underneath the steel appeared. Moreover, I only obtained the cultivation method within the legacy. Everything else is still with your Radiant Saint Hall. They were obtained by the descendant of the Grand Exalt, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak. If it weren't for me, the Tower of Radiance would remain the same as before, filled with endless mist. It would be impossible for it to become like now, a place that protects all Radiant Saint Masters. As a result, your Radiant Saint Hall should be thankful towards me. I eliminated a huge threat for your Radiant Saint Hall. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's face changed time and time again as he listened to Jian Chen's words. He stared right at Jian Chen with a shocking gaze and said sternly, "Why did the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance awaken because of you?" "Perhaps it is because I can control martial soul force," Jian Chen said ambiguously. Obviously, he would not reveal the fact that the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was no longer the same one as before. The ties between the martial soul lineage and the Radiant Saint Hall runs extremely deep, whether good or bad. I don't know the exact details, but I do know that there needs to be martial soul force to obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy, as one cannot overcome the final juncture of the steel forcefully. Only martial soul force can get through the final obstruction and release the Grand Exalt's legacy suppressed below it. Jian Chen stared at the leader of the Radiant Saint Master with shining eyes and continued, "Martial soul force is crucial for obtaining the Grand Exalt's legacy." "Impossible," the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall stressed every single syllable. He refused to accept this. "Leader, perhaps you should ask the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance." "I don't know the exact details, but he should," said Jian Chen. Now that the artifact spirit had fused with some memories, he should be able to answer a few questions. "I will be back." The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall glanced at Jian Chen deeply. He turned around and left with that. Martial soul force was crucial to comprehending the diagram and obtaining the Grand Exalt's legacy. This news was simply far too shocking, and it had completely toppled the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's thinking and understanding. He needed to return and ask the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance closely. Only Jian Chen and Han Zong remained in the slightly gloomy cave after the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's departure. As he looked at Han Zong, who stood just like an ordinary person, Jian Chen's feelings became rather mixed. Before, he and Han Zong were complete strangers. They had no ties at all, yet they were brought together because of martial soul force. However, in order to help him escape from danger, Han Zong had even gone as far as to offend so many peak experts without any hesitation, paying no regard to the consequences. His actions had touched Jian Chen deeply. This was because Jian Chen could clearly sense that Han Zhang's intentions were completely different from the others. The other experts all acted on their desires, wanting to take the Inata Tower for themselves. However, Han Zong had no interest in the Inata Tower at all. His only reason for coming to the desolate plain was to fetch him. Even the 6 other members of the martial soul lineage had come to the desolate plain, all gathering in outer space and supporting Han Zong. The actions of the martial soul lineage had changed Jian Chen's opinion of them. At this moment, Han Zong coughed gently and said, "The primary reason why I've come to see you this time is to discuss the matter in 3 years' time. You can only stay in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years. You'll be very safe during that period, but after the 3 years, you'll be directly tossed into a storm. It'll be extremely dangerous. As a result, we need to properly consider how we're going to break out of the encirclement and leave this place." Right now, Chu Jian and the 5 others have already returned to the Martial Soul Mountain. They are making preparations for the Mountain Soul to descend with even greater power in 3 years' time. However, the power of the Martial Soul Mountain cannot directly connect with the desolate plain. It can only descend in outer space, so the greatest problem we face is making it off the desolate plain and onto the mountain soul while we face the obstructions of all these experts. As long as we make it onto the mountain soul, we can use the connection between the mountain soul and the Marshall's Soul Mountain to cross the tremendous distance, returning to the Marshall's Soul Mountain in a single instance. Are you really not afraid of offending all those peak experts just for me? Jianchen looked at Han Zong brightly. You're the 8th brother of our Marshall's Soul lineage. You're a part of our family. It's no problem even if we have to go up against the world if we can take you back to the Marshall's Soul Mountain, Han Zong said heroically. In that moment, he seemed to fear nothing. Can the Marshall's Soul Mountain stop the heaven-splitting ancestor? Jianchen asked. He had already learnt from the celestial sword saint that the heaven-splitting ancestor had developed an interest in him. This interest was not a good matter. As a result, he had to consider the existence of the heaven-splitting ancestor. Han Zong became stern with the mentioning of the heaven-splitting ancestor. He said, the Marshall's Soul Mountain indeed cannot stop an expert like the heaven-splitting ancestor. However, it'll still require quite some effort if the heaven-splitting ancestor wants to intrude on the Marshall's Soul Mountain. After all, he is one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalts. As long as Grand Exalts don't appear, he is the strongest. There aren't a lot of places that can stop experts like that across the entire Saints world. However, with the heaven-splitting ancestor's status, it's unlikely for him to take personal action just for you. Jian Che understood. After a moment of thought, he said, I have my plans in 3 years' time. You don't need to come to the desolate plain. You have your plans? Han Zong was surprised. Jian Shen was only a god king, so how would he be able to avoid so many peak experts? If no accidents happen, something major will happen on the desolate plain in 3 years' time. At that time, I will find a way off the desolate plain, so you don't need to come, said Jian Shen. Are you confident? I am. All right then. Han Zong looked at Jian Shen sternly and passed him a jade slip. He said, since you have your own plans, I won't say anything more. This jade slip records some knowledge about Marshall's soul force as well as how to use it. I learned from Qing Shan that you have yet to learn all this, so I do hope it can provide you with some assistance. Han Zong passed the jade slip to Jian Shen and continued, however, the contents are only basic knowledge. It won't touch upon anything deep. The true, core legacy of our martial soul force is imprinted on the Marshall's Soul Mountain. It can't be taken away at all, nor are there any methods to pass it on to you. If you want to obtain it, you need to come to the Marshall's Soul Mountain. After that, Han Zong bid farewell to Jian Shen and left the Sword God Mountains. Afterwards, Adriana of the God clan visited the Sword God Mountains as well. She was worried about the situation that Jian Shen currently faced. The descent of the heaven-splitting ancestor had demonstrated his determination to take Jian Shen away. Even the Hall Elder, Tyne, felt powerless and was uncertain about how to handle the situation. This was because the current God clan really could not deal with the heaven-splitting ancestor. Compared to the worried Adriana, Jian Shen was extremely optimistic. He told Adriana to not worry. Jian Shen, you need to be careful of the heaven-splitting clan. The elder believes that it's not good matter that the heaven-splitting ancestor has noticed you. Take care. Adriana looked at Jian Shen in worry and warned him sincerely before leaving the Sword God Mountains soon as well. During the next period of time, it was extremely peaceful for Jian Shen in the Sword God Mountains. This was the territory of the Celestial Sword Saint. Without his approval, even the leader of the Radiant Saint Master or the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire did not dare to intrude on this place. As a result, Jian Shen was completely worry-free. He began to focus on comprehending the laws of corrosion. At the same time, Caius sat on the ground and cultivated deep underground in the cavern cloaked by the concealing formation. At this moment, she slowly opened her eyes and murmured with a frown, "Why are breakthroughs becoming more and more difficult now? I can clearly feel that I seem to have grasped laws of the world at higher levels, but I just can't break through with my cultivation. It feels like some power is stopping me." Kaya sighed gently. Even though she was unwilling to just let the matter be, there was nothing she could do about it. Her gaze gradually landed on the depths of the huge, underground cavern. As she studied it, she gradually became confused. Why do I feel a familiar presence here? But I've never been here before. Kaiya's bewilderment gradually increased. In the end, she looked at the very depths of the cavern, and after some slight hesitation, she stood up. Ignoring Jian Chen's warnings from before his departure, she made her way towards the very depths. Before long, she had approached the very depths. She clearly saw a colossal, headless corpse as she stood there. The body was floating above a pool of blood quietly. Chapter 2370. Kaiya's transformation. The pool of blood that was as vast as an ocean radiated with terrifying, vital energy. It submerged the headless corpse in vital energy, seemingly nourishing it. It made the headless corpse brim with life. The corpse belonged to the strongest king of the ancient great apes, Gusta. Kaiya stared at Gusta's headless corpse from 100 kilometers away. She would glance at the vast pool of blood from time to time. Her doubts grew. She could clearly sense that the source of this sense of familiarity was right in front of her. However, she was rather hesitant. She did not dare to go up, as she knew that the region 100 kilometers around the pool of blood was a forbidden zone. It would be very difficult for her to survive with her current strength. However, the hesitation only lasted for a while. Suddenly, she stepped forwards, setting foot in the range of 100 kilometers. At a closer glance, Kaiya's eyes had already lost their usual liveliness and color. All of a sudden, they seemed hollow as if she had lost her soul, where her actions were no longer hers. Boom! At the same time, the pool of blood no longer remained peaceful with Kaiya's intrusion. The entire pool of blood surged and churned wildly as terrifying vital energy swept towards Kaiya with devastating power. The vital energy churned terrifyingly. Even primordial realm experts faced the danger of dying before the vital energy, let alone Kaiya, a mere god king. However, Kaiya's eyes were hollow and dull, making it seem as if she could not sense the incoming danger at all. She continued to make her way forward, nearing the vital energy that surged over. In a single instance, the terrifying vital energy arrived before Kaiya with devastating power. However, just when Kaiya was about to be swallowed, a seemingly invisible power appeared from her body. The appearance of the power made the laws there change. It was like the laws in the space around her had been forcefully twisted into new laws by a pair of invisible hands. In the end, the terrifying vital energy that was enough to kill primordial realm experts immediately eased up when it approached Kaiya. It lost all of its wildness, no longer posing any threat. Kaiya's eyes remained hollow. She advanced step by step, where she took each one steadily and firmly. She grew closer and closer to the pool of blood up ahead. The space around her twisted, and the laws fell into chaos. It was like they had been interfered with and forcefully changed, making her the supreme ruler there who could not be defied. Up ahead, the tremendous pool of blood that nourished Gusta churned even more violently. The blood-red waves shot high into the air, sweeping towards Kaiya with even more terrifying vital energy. However, it remained a futile effort. No matter how terrifying the vital energy was, even if it could harm peak experts, it was still not enough to stop or harm Kaiya. In the end, Kaiya arrived 3 kilometers away from the pool of blood. At this moment, a barrier rose up and blocked Kaiya, enveloping the entire pool of blood. The barrier was extremely powerful. It had fused with the terrifying vital energy in the pool, using it as an endless energy source. Moreover, it had even fused with the fragments of the laws of the world, allowing it to possess unbelievable defense in the end. Kaiya stopped before barrier. Her hollow eyes suddenly changed at that moment, becoming boundless and profound like the cosmos. The endless mysteries of the world seemed to be invoked, possessing the truths of the world and hiding the ultimate essence of the ways. At a certain moment, her eyes were no longer hollow. They recovered their light. It was a pair of icy cold, emotionless eyes. They were extremely unfamiliar. The eyes basically made Kaya seem like a completely different person. However, Kaya's entire bearing underwent a drastic change with the appearance of these eyes. In that instance, a supreme, dignified sense seemed to appear around her. The astonishingly powerful barrier that could even stop Grand Primes suddenly twisted before Kaya. The barrier had cracked open silently, as if it had been ripped open by an invisible power. It formed a tunnel. Kaya's eyes remained cold. The greatest essence of the ways seemed to gather around her, making her seem invincible. It was like she could control the entire region. She directly stepped through the crack in the barrier and set foot within 3 kilometers of the pool of blood. Jianchen was unable to get this close even with the Anata Tower, yet it had been extremely easy for Kaya. It was like all the arrangements here were unable to stop her tracks. The pool of blood churned wildly as it roared thunderously, like Gusta's corpse had produced a roar. Terrifying pressure crashed down on Kaya like a cascade. The pressure was shockingly great. It could twist space and distort time. Even some Grand Primes would not be able to endure it. However, Kaya's face remained the same as before. No matter how the vital energy churned, no matter how great the pressure became, it was all unable to shake her, unable to approach her. In the end, she stood at the edge of the pool of blood and stared at it emotionlessly. She extended a finger towards it gently. The world seemed to be ripped apart under the gesture, causing the waves to boom out. The churned blood began to part, forming a tunnel that led straight to the bottom of the pool. The pool was hundreds of meters deep. A droplet of bright blood rested in the very depths quietly. The droplet of blood differed greatly from the rest of the pool. Not only was it at a higher level, but the energy it contained was even more terrifying as well. Even if all the vital energy within the pool was combined, it would still be nowhere near enough to match the droplet of blood. This was because the pure energy within the droplet of blood seemed to be absorbed by the pool at all times, making the energy within it leak away, while the energy of the pool was gradually strengthened. In the end, the energy in the pool would be used to nourish Gusta's headless body, not only making it brimming with life, but also constantly refining it, making it more and more powerful. Clearly, the droplet of blood only existed to nourish Gusta's body. A cold light suddenly flashed through Kaya's emotionless eyes when she saw the droplet of blood. As she was in thought, she gently waved at the blood. Immediately, the droplet of blood seemed to experience a calling. It flew out from the bottom of the pool by itself, shooting into one of Kaya's eyes as a streak of red light. Kaya's eyes seemed to be connected to a whole different world, so the droplet of blood vanished completely when it entered her eyes. Afterwards, 2 colossal vortexes seemed to revolve in the depths of Kaya's eyes. She looked at the pool of blood. All the blood gathered within the pool suddenly surged violently. Strands of pure vital energy were whisked away, forming a river that flowed into Kaya's eyes. At that moment, Kaya's eyes seemed to become 2 devouring black holes, swallowing all the vital energy and taking it to another space. It was an extremely shocking sight. As the vital energy flowed away rapidly, the blood left in the pool rapidly decreased as well. The level of its surface dropped at an astonishing rate. After all, the pool of blood was extremely vast. It contained so much liquid that it could be described as a sea. It was immeasurable. However, the level of its surface dropped at a visible rate right now, which was more than enough to demonstrate just how quickly the blood was flowing away. In under a quarter of a minute, a third of the pool had vanished at an unbelievable rate. All of the blood had turned into extremely pure strands of vital energy, disappearing into Kaya's eyes. Kaya did not suck away all of it. After taking away a third, she stopped. Afterwards, she slowly turned around and left the pool's edge. She made her way towards the distance without any reluctance at all. She never even glanced at the colossal body covered in dark gold fur that was nourished at the center of the pool. It was as if the body was not worthy of her attention. Even though the corpse gave off an extremely tremendous pressure, possessing terrifying energy that could shake up the world, it still did not draw her attention. In the end, Kaya arrived over 100 kilometers away from the pool, stepping beyond the boundary. The churning pool gradually settled down at this moment as well, recovering its calmness. However, the reduced blood in the pool did not return, so the headless corpse had sunken as a result. Suddenly, Kaya wavered. She collapsed on the ground as if she had fainted. However, she did not remain unconscious for very long at all before waking up. The coldness and emotionlessness in her eyes had vanished already. Her eyes had recovered their usual light. Strange. Why did I suddenly faint? Kaya sat on the ground in confusion. She was completely clueless about what happened moments ago. The white-robed leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, Yu Qin, gathered with several dozen Radiant God Kings in the Tower of Radiance. However, Yu Qin was not standing within the sacred pavilion, but in the miniature world that contained the Grand Exalt's legacy. Soon after Jian Chen's departure, the miniature world had opened up once again. It did not close up after that, allowing people to move in and out as they wished. However, even with that being the case, there were not many people in the miniature world. There were only a few dozen. Many curious Radiant Saint Masters had gathered outside the gateway to the miniature world. There were many Peak Lords and Radiant God Kings among them. All of them wanted to enter the miniature world, but none of them dared to set foot in there. This was all because of something that the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak, Gong Sun Ji, had said. That simple sentence had taken away the rights of all these Radiant Saint Masters to enter the miniature world. However, all the Radiant Saint Masters gathered there happened to be helpless about it as well. This was because Gong Sun Ji's true identity had already become public. As the descendant of the Grand Exalt, he had become an existence who stood above everyone. He also formed an insurmountable obstruction. The several dozen Radiant God Kings gathered in the miniature world all showed respect towards the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Gong Sun Ji was the only God King among them who no longer bowed to the leader and no longer showed him any respect. At this moment, Yu Qin stood with his eyes closed before the stele that reached towards into the clouds, comprehending the diagram in there. Although the legacy at the bottom of the stele had been taken away, the diagram within the stele had not dispersed. It remained there. At this moment, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall finally opened his eyes. He stared at the stele before him with mixed feelings and thought, it really doesn't work. Once I comprehend to the end, I'll encounter an invisible barrier, and there is nothing I can do about it with my current ability. Was Jian Chen telling the truth, that it can only be overcome with martial soul force? The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall frowned. Only members of the Imperial clan can comprehend the diagram that Master left behind in the past. You're not a part of the Imperial clan, so you have no right to comprehend Master's diagram. At this moment, an obscure voice rang out in the leader's head. Yu Qin gathered his attention when he heard the voice. Obviously, he knew that the voice came from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. This was because only the artifact spirit that stood like a god within the Tower of Radiance could communicate with him without giving his location away. The Imperial clan? What's the Imperial clan? The leader of the Radiant Saint Master replied with a question, starting a mental conversation with the artifact spirit. Members of the Imperial clan control a special power. This power is known as martial soul force by you. As long as they possess martial soul force, they are members of the Imperial clan among hallowed Saint Masters. What did you say? Asked Yu Qin. The artifact spirit's message was astonishing, booming through Yu Qin's head like a bolt of thunder. It utterly stunned him. The people of the martial soul lineage are intolerable mortal enemies of our Radiant Saint Hall. How can they be the Imperial clan among hallowed Saint Masters? Yu Qin refused to accept this. The news was just too shocking, completely toppling his beliefs and understanding. The artifact spirit said coldly and emotionlessly, I don't know the reason why you who are only regular citizens now stand as enemies of the Imperial clan, but during my master's age, your identities would only be citizens of the Empire. Empire? Was there an empire completely formed out of Radiant Saint Masters back then? Yu Qin immediately asked. There was no record of this information he had just learnt. Even the oldest, most ancient archives were unable to dictate something so distant. That's right. During that age, we were a powerful group within the universe. We had a great, prosperous empire completely composed out of hallowed saint masters. Under masters' lead, we claimed territory after territory and carved out a piece of the world for ourselves, establishing an everlasting state, said the artifact spirit slowly, narrating the matters of the past. The master of the Tower of Radiance actually possessed martial soul force as well. Yu Chen became lost as he struggled to accept all this. The news from the artifact spirit had almost overturned everything he knew in the past. Since the master of the Tower of Radiance is a part of the Imperial clan and possesses martial soul force, shouldn't his descendant possess martial soul force as well? Yu Chen asked again. Every member of the Imperial clan is given birth to by the world. It has nothing to do with bloodline. Chapter 2372, Gong Sun Ji's change. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, Yu Chen, did not communicate with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance for very long. However, during this short amount of time, the information he learnt from the artifact spirit had shaken up his mind more than anything else. Even though he was as powerful as a Grand Prime and possessed a mind of steel, he was still affected. The Imperial clan is given birth to by the world. Yu Chen felt bitter inside. The martial soul lineage was the mortal enemy of the Radiant Saint Hall. There would be fighting and deaths as soon as they encountered each other. It was impossible for them to reach a compromise. As a matter of fact, there were clear records of them exterminating the entire martial soul lineage in a few ancient archives within the Radiant Saint Hall. Whether it was the Radiant Saint Hall or the martial soul lineage, they had both existed for countless years. During this time, countless conflicts of varying scales had erupted. The martial soul lineage had even been devastated by the Radiant Saint Hall several times in history. They had killed off all members of the martial soul lineage, leaving the martial soul mountain empty. However, the world would give birth to new members of the martial soul lineage, so even if they all died, someone new would appear in the future. All the secret techniques and legacies of the martial soul lineage were imprinted on the martial soul mountain as well. Hence, as long as they returned to the martial soul mountain, they would be able to grasp all of it. It was exactly because of this that the martial soul lineage's legacy still existed. Now that the martial soul lineage that the Radiant Saint Hall had killed off several times throughout history was actually called the Imperial clan by the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, while they, the hallowed Saint Masters, were actually the citizens of the Imperial clan, it all felt like a huge joke. If the person who had said this was not the artifact spirit of the supreme treasure of the Radiant Saint Hall, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall probably would have killed them with a slap already. Since the martial soul lineage is the Imperial clan, why are they so weak? According to my knowledge, basically none of them have managed to become a Grand Prime throughout history, asked the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall sternly. Every single member of the Imperial clan is an extremely powerful existence. They're the protector gods of the everlasting state. As for why they've become as weak as you've mentioned, something has probably happened to the Imperial clan after my master passed away. The artifact spirit's voice rang out in Yu Chen's head. Yu Chen fell silent and no longer bothered about the matter with the martial soul lineage. He continued to ask, since you've awakened now, will you be choosing a new master? If you do choose a new master, will they be a member of the Imperial clan, or will it be the descendant of your master? Or maybe someone else? My master is dead. But, the artifact spirit suddenly stopped talking and fell silent afterwards. Artifact spirit, Yu Chen waited for a while. After the artifact spirit stopped responding to him, he began to call out, but he received no reply in the end. It was as if his contact with the artifact spirit was lost. He was unable to look for the artifact spirit here. Unless the artifact spirit made contact with him first, there was nothing he could do. After all, the level of the Tower of Radiance was just too high, and it was basically in perfect shape, different from the damaged Anata Tower. Even with the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's strength, he could not act as he wished within the Tower of Radiance. At the same time, a middle-aged man in white robes sat on the ground within an unknown space of the Tower of Radiance. The middle-aged man was the artifact spirit of the saint artifact that had once accompanied Jian Qin. Now, his identity had changed drastically. He had become the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, which elevated his status to a whole new level. The artifact spirit trembled gently. His body would fade and consolidate. He was extremely unstable. As an artifact spirit, he did not have a body at all. Although the body he possessed right now seemed no different from one that had flesh and blood, it was only a spirit conjured from energy. The artifact spirit's power was unstable, which affected the spirit. It made his body fade in and out. No. My master is not dead. My master is Jian Qin. Jian Qin is my true master, the artifact spirit bellowed furiously. The light in his eyes changed rapidly, as if two completely different thoughts were locked in an intense battle. I've absorbed the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Although the lingering consciousness contains the artifact spirit's memories, it also contains his thoughts. His thoughts are affecting me, attempting to influence me secretly into becoming him. But that's impossible. Don't you even think about twisting my mind, lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit. I will never become a second you, as I will cease to be me if that happens, the artifact spirit growled as he did his best to suppress the influence from the lingering consciousness. Yu Qin, who stood before the stele, finally sighed and gave up on waiting since the artifact spirit did not reply after such a long amount of time. Leader, you must know about my identity already. The master of the Tower of Radiance is my ancestor. My ancestor's legacy has chosen me, but the crucial cultivation method in the legacy was stolen by Jian Qin of the martial soul lineage through underhanded methods. I hope the leader can take it back as soon as possible and complete my ancestor's legacy. As soon as Yu Qin opened his eyes, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak standing behind him, Gong Sun Ji, spoke out. His voice was filled with undisguised anger. He showed no respect towards the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall at all. Instead, he acted like they were equal. As a matter of fact, there was even a sliver of arrogance. It was as if Gong Sun Ji felt like his status now surpassed the leader of the Radiant Saint Halls, as he was the descendant of the master of the Tower of Radiance and the blood of a grand exalt flowed through him. Yu Qin obviously sensed Gong Sun Ji's transformation. He frowned slightly and said slightly seriously, "That's a matter for the upper echelon of the Sacred Hall to consider. It's not something you should be worrying about. Just do what you need to do." With that, Yu Qin left. After Yu Qin's departure, Gong Sun Ji's face gradually sank. He looked in the direction that the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had traveled off into as he thought, "You were the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall once. You stood high up, where I could only look up to you. But now, I am the Grand Exalt's descendant, and the Grand Exalt's blood flows through me. I've also obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy, so my future accomplishments will be limitless. You will end up under my feet sooner or later, and the position of leader will be mine one day as well." Gong Sun Ji's confidence swelled. "Gong Sun Ji, although you're the descendant of the master of the Tower of Radiance, it doesn't seem appropriate for you to talk to the leader like that," Dong Lin Qiushui said with a frown from behind Gong Sun Ji. Gong Sun Ji snorted coldly and said, "There is no need for you to stick your nose into my matters. Dong Lin Qiushui, seeing how you worked with me in holding off Jian Qin before, I'll let this slide this time. If you dare to disrespect me again, I'll get the artifact spirit to chase you out." Gong Sun Ji turned around and stared at Dong Lin Qiushui. He said coldly, "Although I'm not the master of the Tower of Radiance right now, the Tower of Radiance did come from my ancestor, and I've already obtained my ancestor's legacy. I will inherit the Tower of Radiance before long, and the artifact spirit will accept me as his master." Dong Lin Qiushui looked at the cold Gong Sun Ji and said nothing. She did not doubt Gong Sun Ji's words at all. There was probably no other person more suitable than Gong Sun Ji for inheriting the Tower of Radiance. After all, the automatic submission of the Grand Exalt's legacy had set everything straight. "Dong Lin Qiushui, don't argue with him. Ever since Gongsun Ji obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy, he has changed. He's no longer the same Gongsun Ji as before. The Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak's voice rang out in Donglin Qiushui's head. Donglin Qiushui sighed inside. She listened to the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak and no longer argued with Gongsun Ji. She had already broken through to late God King now, so she needed to spend a very lengthy period of time in the Tower of Radiance. She did not dare to venture out, just in case the mysterious expert who specifically targeted late Radiant God Kings appeared. When he saw how Donglin Qiushui, who also stood as a lord of a main peak, no longer argue with him, Gongsun Ji became even more arrogant. It was to the point where he started to look down on them. Afterwards, Gongsun Ji looked towards the gateway to the miniature world and looked down at the radiant Saint Masters there who wanted to enter the miniature world but dared not. He said coldly, "I want to know everything about Jian Chen, along with everything about his current situation in the outside world. I will give whoever provides me with the most accurate and most complete information permission to enter the miniature world. If you satisfy me, I can even watch out for you specially in the future." Gongsun Ji's words caused a disturbance among the radiant Saint Masters outside. Many of them became interested, and immediately, a few left. They were heading off to collect the information that Gongsun Ji wanted. Gongsun Ji's identity now was very different. Many radiant Saint Masters, even radiant God Kings, wanted to develop ties with him for the future. As a result, plenty of people were willing to serve him. 9 sword-shaped mountains stood quietly within an extremely well-hidden space within the Tower of Radiance. Who knows how many years the mountains had stood there. They gave off a heavy presence of age. A snow-white sword was planted on each of the peaks. There were a total of 9 swords. They shone with dazzling light, like miniature suns atop the mountains. The space around the swords was all twisted, a phenomenon caused by extremely great power. The power originated from the 9 swords. A devastating power was sealed with the 9 swords. It was terrifyingly powerful. The artifact spirit appeared silently among the 9 mountains as a middle-aged man. He glanced past the swords on the mountains and murmured, "The master of the Tower of Radiance had 9 extremely powerful retainers who fought wars with him, leaving behind a meritorious record of service. When the master of the Tower of Radiance died, his 9 retainers did not choose to continue living either. They used their innate secret technique to condense their vital essence, condensing their bodies and their power into 9 swords. They left these swords to the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance to keep suppressed here so that they could serve the next master of the Tower of Radiance in battle. As long as someone possesses one of these 9 swords, they will possess the power of one of the 9 retainers. They'll immediately be able to fend off peak experts. I learned from the memories of the artifact spirit that the 9 retainers transformed themselves into these 9 swords after the master of the Tower of Radiance died. Afterwards, the swords were stored here by the artifact spirit. As a result, the control over the swords should be with the artifact spirit. The artifact spirit stared at the 9 swords, and his brows furrowed tightly. Although I've learned of the existence of these 9 swords, I don't know how to allocate them. It looks like I need to fuse with even more memories of the artifact spirit to learn the method of allocation in greater detail. But the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit will have a greater and greater influence on me if I do that. I might even become a second him and cease to be me. The artifact spirit hesitated. Clearly, he understood the huge risk involved in fusing with more memories from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. However, very soon, the artifact spirit made up his mind and became determined. Master has gone to such great lengths to make me the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, yet he's facing great danger outside, and I can't do anything about it. Once the 9 swords have been allocated, they might be able to help Master. I can't think too much about it now for Master's sake. The artifact spirit suddenly vanished. What did you say? The martial soul lineage is the imperial clan among us radiant Saint Masters? Xian Zhan stood within the sacred hall. He stared at Yu Chen with widened eyes and disbelief. Yu Chen nodded. He seemed to be in a slight daze as he said, that's indeed what I learnt from the artifact spirit. Xian Zhan stared at Yu Chen closely. After confirming that Yu Chen was not joking, he sucked in a deep breath and said, I really never thought that the martial soul lineage we never got along with would actually. Sigh. What do you plan on doing next? Do you plan on announcing this or keeping it hidden? Yu Chen shook his head and said sternly, only you and I know about this right now. Let's not tell anyone else for now. Even I can't accept the fact that the martial soul lineage is the imperial clan, let alone others. After all, the grievances between our Radiant Saint Hall and the martial soul lineage has already reached the point of no return. If we announce this news, it'll probably only lead to an upheaval. Xian Zhan sighed gently, this news is just too shocking. It is indeed inconvenient for too many people to know about it. Xian Zhan stared at Yu Chen and changed the subject. What do you plan on doing about the cultivation method with Jian Chen? Yu Chen stood with his arms behind his back as he stared at the endless sea of clouds outside. Ever since Gong Sun Ji learnt that the blood of a Grand Exalt flows in his veins, his mentality has begun to change. He cares about this even more than me, and he desires the Grand Exalt's cultivation method severely. If Jian Chen survives 3 years later, a battle will definitely happen between the two of them. One of them belongs to the martial soul lineage, the imperial clan of the Radiant Saint Masters, while the other one possesses the bloodline of the Master of the Tower of Radiance, making it extremely likely for him to become its second master. Their battle should be extremely interesting. At the same time, in the residence of an elder somewhere else in the sacred hall, the white-robed Biyao knelt on the ground as her body trembled gently. Her head was buried deeply as tears flowed from her eyes constantly. She was filled with utter sorrow and grief. A white-robed, middle-aged woman sat before her emotionlessly. The middle-aged woman was an elder of the Radiant Saint Hall, Mu Shui. Master, Biyao knelt before Mu Shui and sobbed. Biyao, you should go. Return to your soaring cloud's peak. From today onwards, you are no longer my disciple, Mu Shui said firmly. Her gaze towards Biyao contained some pity. She continued, don't blame me for being vicious. Blame the second senior brother of your soaring cloud's peak. Your second senior brother is Jian Chen of the martial soul lineage in disguise. You were so close with him, so even if you had no idea about his true identity, I still can't accept you as my disciple. From today onwards, our bond is severed. We no longer know each other. Go, Mu Shui said coldly. Biyao's heart immediately shivered when she heard Mu Shui's heartless words. She said nothing at all. After bowing her head 9 times towards Mu Shui, she wiped away her tears and stood up before leaving the sacred hall in low spirits. Master, Biyao knew nothing before. She's innocent. Why must you be so heartless? Donglin Yanxue walked in afterwards and looked at Mu Shui furiously. Mu Shui's feelings became extremely mixed as she looked at Donglin Yanxue. There was undisguised disappointment. She sighed deeply and said, Yanxue, you were always so clever, so why have you become so dumb now? You clearly knew that the martial soul lineage is our mortal enemy, yet you still helped Jian Chen escape, which was a huge mistake. I know what I'm doing. Master, do you plan on severing your ties with me just like Junior Biyao? Donglin Yanxue said without any regrets at all. Mu Shui treated Donglin Yanxue completely differently from Biyao. She sighed gently and said, Yanxue, what you should be thinking about isn't something as simple as the severance of our relationship but the incoming punishment instead. You know that your situation is far more severe than Biyao's. I'll just relinquish the position of chosen saint. I am a part of the Donglin clan. Our Donglin clan may not be as great as the Radiant Saint Hall, but we're still a peak organization that dominates an entire region. I refuse to believe that the Radiant Saint Hall is bold enough to execute me. Donglin Yanxue was fearless. When Mu Shui saw how Donglin Yanxue did not even care about the position of chosen saint for Jian Chen's sake, she deeply understood that her proudest disciple held extremely deep feelings towards Jian Chen. This made her feel powerless. She could only sigh inside. Master, I will be dismissing myself. Donglin Yanshue bowed slightly and left. On the soaring cloud's peak, Han Xian sat in a small wooden hut at the top of the mountain. He clutched a thumb-sized crystal in his hand. The crystal was called a memory crystal. It could hold recordings of images and voices. Han Xian's hand trembled uncontrollably as he looked at the crystal in his hand. Even his face had paled unnaturally. The crystal came from his clan. It recorded a personal message from the person in charge of the Han family. His words changed Han Xian's identity and fate. Undisguised grief filled Han Xian's eyes as he stared at the crystal in his hand. His eyes had become bloodshot. He refused to accept the contents of the crystal. He wanted to send the senses of his soul into the crystal again to check the message from the patriarch of the Han family again. However, he lacked the courage. The Han family has abandoned me. My name has been removed from the family tree. From today onwards, I may still be surnamed Han, but I have nothing to do with the Han family anymore, Han Xian murmured sternly. His heavy voice was extremely hoarse. All because Chang Yang was my disciple, because Chang Yang is Jian Chen of the martial soul lineage in disguise, my clan has expelled me. Han Xian stood up slowly. He arrived outside the wooden hut and stared at the sea of clouds beyond the mountain. His bleak figure seemed lonely. At the foot of the mountain was the white-robed Biyao. She climbed the steep, long steps in low spirits as well. She made her way up the soaring cloud's peak step by step. Her eyes were red, hollow, and lifeless. She seemed like she had lost her soul. She did not choose to fly with radiant saint force. Instead, she used her feet like a mortal, climbing the long steps like a machine. The second senior brother she admired the most was actually a member of the martial soul lineage and had become a public enemy of everyone inside the Radiant Saint Hall. Even her master, Mu Shui, who had given her glory and status, had expelled her as a disciple. All these matters impacted Biyao greatly, harming her still tender heart very much. Even though she had been cultivating for quite some time already, the environment she grew up in allowed her to maintain the heart of a young lady. Her mind was extremely frail. After a very long time, Biyao finally arrived at the end of the stone steps. Her white shoes were all muddy now. Han Xian seemed to have been waiting at the end of the steps for a very long time. He stood there quietly and stared at Biyao in her soiled, white robes. Teacher, I've been expelled by my master. Biyao choked back her tears as she looked at Han Xian's haggard face. I already know. You might not be the disciple of an elder anymore, but you're still the disciple of my soaring cloud's peak, said Han Xian. At this moment, a few hallowed saint masters arrived around the soaring cloud's peak. The one leading them happened to possess a six-colored soul core. The six-colored soul core was equivalent to over-gods among fighters. I am the disciple of the blue water peak, Guhan. Is disciple Zhuofeng present? The leading hallowed saint master said loudly, ignoring Han Xian's presence. His voice rang out across the entire soaring cloud's peak. Zhuofeng flew over from afar on the soaring cloud's peak. Are you Zhuofeng? I've come under the orders of my teacher. The soaring cloud's peak is no longer suitable for you. Are you willing to leave the soaring cloud's peak and become a disciple of our blue water peak? Asked the hallowed saint master. Zhuofeng beamed when he heard that. Due to Jian Chen, the soaring cloud's peak had developed a very bad name within the Radiant Saint Hall now. Zhuofeng had already wanted to break away from the soaring cloud's peak. Hence, now that the lord of another peak invited him, he immediately became tempted. However, soon afterwards, he became troubled and looked at Han Xian. Han Xian stood with his hands by his sides. He said emotionlessly, Zhuofeng, if you want to go, then go. Thank you for allowing me, sir. Zhuofeng clasped his fist and left the soaring cloud's peak with no reluctance at all. Before long, a travel-weary group of female Radiant Saint Masters arrived. The person at the front was a woman who roughly seemed to be in her 30s. She also had a 6-colored soul core, and she said softly, "Is disciple Biyao present? I have come under the orders of the Lord of the Myriad Flowers Peak to invite you to join us." Han Xian sighed gently when he saw the people from the Myriad Flowers Peak. He seemed to age in that instance. The situation with the Soaring Clouds Peak was indeed hopeless now. Even the 2 remaining disciples were going to be taken away. Han Xian waved his hand rather powerlessly and said, "Sai, you should all go. Go find a new future. The Soaring Clouds Peak is no longer suitable for you to stay." With that, Han Xian turned around and left. He seemed slightly lonely. "No, I won't leave the Soaring Clouds Peak. No matter what happens to the Soaring Clouds Peak, Biyao will always remain as a disciple of the Soaring Clouds Peak." In the blink of an eye, it had already been a year since Jian Chen arrived in the Sword God Mountains. He had spent the entire time comprehending the laws of corrosion, but without the Fortune Jade, his rate of comprehension was significantly slower. He only made it to mid-over God after an entire year. It looks like I can only comprehend the laws of corrosion to God King in the remaining 2 years. I can only depend on Kaya for the laws of creation and fire, thought Jian Chen. Even though he had been cultivating through absorbing the golden cores of laws and would not encounter any bottlenecks at all, he simply did not have enough time. And the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall hasn't come again after that time. I wonder if he has really made things tough for Donglin Yanxue and the Soaring Clouds Peak. It's a pity that I don't have the ability to help them, Jian Chen sighed secretly inside. He sat within his dwelling and stared in the direction of the Radiant Saint Hall for a while before going to find the Celestial Sword Saint. The Celestial Sword Saint had not changed at all since Jian Chen first saw him. He remained seated in the same position with his back towards Jian Chen. Like a meditating monk, he had not moved at all. "I know why you've come. You don't need to worry about the people you have ties with in the Radiant Saint Hall." As if he knew everything, the Celestial Sword Saint answered Jian Chen's question before he could even ask anything. Jian Chen knew that with the Celestial Sword Saint's strength, he was aware everything that happened on the entire desolate plain even if he remained here. He bowed towards the Celestial Sword Saint and asked, "Senior, may I ask about Donglin Yanxue's current situation? That little girl you've mentioned has been taken away by Donglin Su before she was punished. Donglin Su is the current ancestor of the Donglin clan, so you don't need to worry about her." Jian Chen finally became relieved and stopped worrying a lot. Time passed silently. Over 2.5 years had passed since Jian Chen's arrival at the Sword God Mountains. On this day, a faint, gray mist suddenly permeated Jian Chen's cave, radiating outwards. The gray mist was extremely corrosive. Wherever it passed by, the ground was eaten away, and the vegetation withered. Even the origin energy in the surroundings fused with the great mist, becoming a part of it, allowing the mist to become even more powerful. But that was all. As the gray mist gradually ate away at the vegetation, a hazy light suddenly appeared. Powerful sword intent permeated the surroundings and flooded the gray mist. Even from the ground, the same light appeared, forcing back the gray mist. After all, the Sword God Mountains was the Celestial Sword Saint's territory. Every single leaf and pebble there had become extraordinary under the perpetual influence of the Celestial Sword Saint's sword intent. They possessed power that could not be underestimated. At this moment, the gray mist completely receded into the cave. Afterwards, Jian Chen walked out from the cave. "I've finally comprehended the laws of corrosion to God King after 2.5 years. I need the laws of the sword, creation, destruction, fire, strength, curses, and corrosion to activate the lingering power within the 8 experts. I've already grasped the laws of the sword, destruction, strength, space, curses, and corrosion out of the 8. Coupled with Kaya's laws of creation and fire, they all happen to be at God King." Having achieved his objective, Jian Chen no longer wanted to stay in the Sword God Mountains. Immediately, he went to find the Celestial Sword Saint to bid farewell to him. He wanted to leave early and take everyone by surprise. I said that I would let you stay in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years, not 1 day more or less, said the celestial sword saint in a forceful manner. Helpless, Jianchen could only stay in the Sword God Mountains for the remaining half of a year. Jianchen planned on comprehending the laws of the sword with the remaining time. Although he had obtained the Grand Exalt's cultivation method for Radiant Saint Force, allowing him to reach an even higher level, it was impossible for the increase in just half a year to have any impact on his battle prowess. As for the method of using martial soul force he had obtained from Hunzong, it was only the basics. The true core of the entire legacy remained on the martial soul mountain. It was impossible for these mere basics to bring him any assistance against the peak experts in half a year's time. As a result, Jianchen could only spend this remaining time comprehending the laws of the sword. When Jianchen attempted the path of swords, he had become enlightened to the bearing of a sword immortal. As such, he basically had a foot planted in the sword immortal realm. The sword immortal realm was equivalent to the primordial realm. Sword immortal is about the immortal bearing, and the sword chi must hold the essence of immortal. Although I've already understood it, my sword chi still hasn't transformed completely. Jianchen did not return to his dwelling. Instead, he found a mountain and began meditating on its peak, comprehending the bearing of the immortal, so that his sword chi could transform completely. Although this seemed like a simple process, it was anything but easy to actually achieve it. 1 month. 2 months. Time passed bit by bit. Jianchen sat there for 4 months. During that time, he was like a statue. He did not move at all. The only change was the sword chi that would surge out from him from time to time, rampaging in the surroundings. The sword chi was either tough or soft, either powerful or weak. It constantly changed, but Jianchen never took the final step, becoming an immortal of the sword. Jianchen finally ended his meditation after 4 months and went to seek guidance from the celestial sword saint. Although he was confident that this final step would not take him too long with his talent, he clearly had no confidence in taking the step in the remaining 2 months. If you want to become a sword immortal, you must first understand the word immortal. The understanding of immortal varies from person to person. In the eyes of mortals, immortals possess great power. They can fly in the skies and burrow through the ground. They are beings of eternal life. In the eyes of some cultivators who have quite the accomplishment in cultivation, immortals is only a division of cultivation realms. However, in my eyes, immortals represent the natural way of change in the world. The celestial sword saint's vigorous voice boomed out in Jianchen's head like a bell, immediately making him feel enlightened. In a trance, he seemed to understand something. He seemed to grasp something. Every single person has a different view on immortals. It holds different meanings to them. But what are immortals to me? Jianchen left where the celestial sword saint cultivated. He was in a trance as he returned to the mountain where he had meditated for 4 years. He pondered that question thoroughly. My understanding of immortals is that they're free, liberated, and untainted. They have surpassed the world and are unshackled. However, that's only a portion of my understanding towards immortals right now. I haven't found its entirety. No wonder I had only taken a single step when I understood the bearing of sword immortal. My understanding towards immortals is incomplete. Only by filling this in can I reach completion and truly reach the sword immortal realm. Jianchen began to meditate again. This time, he did not use any power at all. Instead, he was just like a mortal. He sat on the peak of the mountain, enduring the natural elements. In just a month, he became covered by a thin layer of dust. Additionally, his white robes had lost their original colors, having darkened. During the last 3 days that Jianchen stayed in the Sword God Mountains, a stormy night had arrived. There was a heavy downpour as thunder boomed through the skies. Lightning danced like dragons and snakes. At this moment, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky with an intense flash. However, the bolt of lightning was like a flash through Jianchen's head. In that instance, he immediately understood what an immortal was to him. He suddenly stood up. He stared at the stormy sky and pointed at it. He called out, "My immortal is the world, and the world is the universe, the endless galaxies. It holds everything and is boundless. My way can hold everything, can devour galaxies, can make everything underneath me become a part of my way. From today onwards, I am a sword immortal, an immortal of the sword." Jian Chen's voice was like the first sounds of the universe. It contained a mysterious power, booming through the entire sky. Boom! A bolt of lightning fell, but the electricity gathered on the tip of Jian Chen's finger. It flickered and dispersed. However, in the next moment, the electricity on Jian Chen's fingertip turned into a resplendent strand of sword qi. At the same time, the storm silently changed. Unknowingly, the rain that fell from the sky was no longer just rain. It had turned into strands of sharp sword qi. The sword qi was densely packed and blotted out the entire sky. It produced a never-ending series of spurts as it fell on the sword god mountains. Jian Chen had used his will as a sword immortal to change the power of nature here. Chapter 2376, The Ultimate Way of the Sword. In the distance, the celestial sword saint who never moved suddenly opened his eyes. He turned around and looked at Jian Chen sitting within the raining sword qi as his old eyes became extremely deep. He has actually comprehended a way at such a level. He treats the universe as his immortal, to become a sword immortal and reach the primordial realm. This is clearly on the level of the ultimate way of the sword. Now that he has grasped the ultimate way of the sword, his powers of the laws of the sword will be greater than other sword immortals. Moreover, he has used the boundless cosmos to lay down his foundations, so his future potential is unlimited. If he successfully matures, he'll reach the peak. He'll definitely stand at the apex of the universe, the celestial sword saint murmured in a voice that only he could hear. He stared at Jian Chen in the distance, as if he wanted to completely understand Jian Chen's ins and outs. Only a while later did he murmur softly, "He has only just reached the sword immortal realm, yet he has developed already a basic affinity with the way. He can influence his surroundings with his will and change nature. If this child successfully matures, he really does hold the potential to become a sword god in the future. It's just a pity that he cultivates the chaotic body. Even if he reaches the sword god realm and stands at the apex of the universe, his cultivation will never be able to catch up to his comprehension." Several hours later, the storm subsided, and the sky cleared up. Jian Chen did not leave the mountain. Instead, he remained seated where he was, silently consolidating his level of comprehension and comprehending the various wonders that came with the sword immortal realm. Only on the third day did he rouse. This day also happened to be exactly 3 years since he had entered the sword god mountains, not a single day more or less. Not only was the celestial sword saint forceful with his ways, but his temperament was also rather strange as well. When he let Jian Chen stay here for 3 years, he forced him to stay the entire 3 years, not a single day more or less. Today was the day when Jian Chen would leave. "Thank you for your guidance, Senior, allowing me to reach the sword immortal realm." Jian Chen stood behind the celestial sword saint again and bowed towards him deeply. "The 3 years are up. Go. Leave the sword god mountains. From now onwards, you have nothing to do with me," the celestial sword saint said without looking back. He remained still like a statue. "Farewell. If I have the opportunity, I will definitely return Senior's kindness." Jian Chen left after he completed the bow. "You will face a crisis of life or death. No one can save you from this crisis. Whether you can survive will be up to your own luck. Do your best." When Jian Chen descended from the mountain, the celestial sword saint's voice rang out in his head. "A crisis of life or death." Jian Chen paused. The light in his eyes flickered. He knew the celestial sword saint was not one to tell lies. Since he had said that, it meant that Jian Chen would truly face a crisis. Moreover, he knew that the celestial sword saint was not referring to the current situation. Is it really like the sword spirit said? I will face a crisis. Jianchen thought before shaking his head. He knew that peak experts were unable to peer into anything about him. Although the celestial sword saint was very powerful, he was still unable to do that. It looks like the celestial sword saint possesses a peak god artifact like the twin swords or the primeval divine hull. If that's the case, the artifact spirit of the god artifact saw a glimpse of my future. Jianchen found that it made sense the more he thought about it. After all, he had learned from the heaven-splitting ancestors' body of clouds that the celestial sword saint had obtained the 3 lives sword god's legacy. It only made sense for him to possess a peak god artifact. Jianchen gradually made his way into the distance. The celestial sword saint stared at Jianchen as his aged eyes became extremely profound. He said, he still doesn't understand that the true crisis is right beside him. However, so what if he does understand? He can't change anything at all. I can only hope that he survives. The artifact spirit sat within a secret space within the Tower of Radiance. His eyes would clear up at times and become murky at other times. An expression of struggle would flash across his face from time to time. The artifact spirit was currently locked in an intense struggle against the thoughts from the lingering consciousness in the Tower of Radiance. Clearly, his situation now was far more severe than in the past. This was because he had fused with too many memories from the lingering consciousness, allowing the lingering consciousness to gain a greater and greater influence over him. 3 years have already passed, but I still haven't found the memory that can release the protector swords. Master, I can't help you. Experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains. Not only did all the peak experts from 3 years ago arrive, but even more peak experts had hurried over from various places across the Saints' world after Jianchen's true identity had been exposed. As a result, there were quite a few more peak experts around the Sword God Mountains compared to 3 years ago. They were dispersed around the surroundings, and they looked at the Sword God Mountains with fear. None of them dared to set foot within the mountains. Tu San of the Heaven-Splitting clan happened to be among them. However, his gaze towards the Sword God Mountains was much more fearful. There was even some dread. He was someone who had arrived at death's doorstep 3 years ago. If the celestial sword saint wanted to kill him, his soul would have been destroyed with that stroke. It was also from then on that he gained a deep understanding of the terrifying level the celestial sword saint's strength had reached. As a result, he currently stood far away from the Sword God Mountains. Tyne of the God clan actually isn't here. It looks like she retreated after Master showed himself. But that does make sense. Apart from being undefeatable on the Godnigma plane if they draw themselves up like a turtle, how can the God clan fend off our heaven-splitting clan? Tu San observed his surroundings with the senses of his soul, and he sneered inside. At the same time, the projection of the Martial Soul Mountain descended once again in outer space. Under Hun Zhang's lead, all the members of the Martial Soul lineage gathered together and stood in formation. Hun Zhang stood on the projection and stared at the tremendous plain of land that hovered in outer space with shining eyes. Although he had learnt from Jianchen that something major would happen on the desolate plain, Hun Zhang still brought the entire Martial Soul lineage just in case. He was preparing for the worst-case scenario. There are even more experts this time. Even if we break a soul sword, it probably won't be of much use, the man called Chu Jian said sternly on the Martial Soul Mountain. Let's observe the situation from here first. We can't interfere unless the situation becomes critical. It'll probably be different this time, said Hun Zhang. Jianchen's figure slowly appeared near the boundary of the Sword God Mountains. He was making his way out. He did not try to disguise himself because he knew that all his methods of hiding would be useless before these peak experts. Mo Tianyan's mask could only conceal his true appearance and presence. However, it did not make him undetectable to the senses of the soul. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.